The time is 10 o'clock. If everyone is ready, I would like to begin by welcoming everyone to this meeting of the Assets and Procurement Committee here at New Shair Hall and everyone watching via YouTube. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. Can I ask, though, that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place? Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave by the nearest marked fire exit and assemble in the car park. The closest fire escape is through the middle doors on my left. With the Democratic Services Officer, please report any apologies for absence.
We have apologies from councillors Count, Hunt and Dew. We have Councillor Goldsack substituting for Councillor Hunt and Councillor Murphy substituting for Councillor Dew.
Thank you. Does any member wish to declare any disposable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disposable interest? We'll move to the minutes. We're being asked to approve the public minutes of the committee meeting held on 18 October 2023 as an accurate record. If any committee member wants to raise a question on the accuracy of the minutes only, can they do so now? Although if there are any issues with the confidential minutes, I would suggest that we deal with that at the end of the meeting. Does anybody wish to raise an issue? I see no objections, so we will take that as carried unanimously. We are therefore asked to note the action log. We have one public question relating to the final item, Shair Hall update, and we will take that question under that item. In which case, we will move to the first agenda item number 4. Can I ask Jaren Clulo, Connecting Programme Director, who is joining us remotely, to present this report, which is on page 17 of your agenda pack.
Chair, I'm not sure whether she's actually joined yet. She was having difficulty, so it might be best to take the next item.
If members are happy, I'll move on to the next item. So the next item is the Land and Property Performance Report, and this starts at page 23. Can I ask Chris Ramsbottom, Service Director for Property, to present this report?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, committee. I bring this Land and Property Performance Report to committee today as a general update item. Committee is asked to note the content of the report and highlight any further details to be presented and considered to show the transformational change, improvements and current position at future meetings of this committee. Item 2.1 covers an action from the previous committee in October, which asks for the staffing establishment for each of the 3 teams within property to be expanded in more detail. The 3 tables clarify the post titles within each team, the total salary costs of each team and any vacancies within them, noting particularly no vacancies within the facilities management team and compliance and 1 vacancy within strategic assets. Items 2.2 to 2.6 details progress towards a new corporate property strategy and the embedding of the corporate landlord model, and informs the A&P committee on the 16th of January as the committee where the strategy will be brought forward for consideration. Item 2.7 details progress in the adoption and implementation of the property asset management system Concerto. Item 2.8 presents the current performance measures which have all progressed since the previous committee in October, with 6 compliance indicators on target and 1 KPI off target. I note committee's previous comment regarding indicator 171, and we will be looking at alternative benchmarking within this area, which will stretch ourselves more than the existing indicator does at present. Item 2.9 informs of the good progress and management by the estates team with our financial colleagues in the asset valuation work, which is a statutory requirement as part of the council statement of accounts. And lastly, I just want to bring committee's awareness to the County Farms newsletter, which is produced quarterly and is very informative regarding the county farms estate news, performance, opportunities and events. And a link is provided within the report for your own perusal of that report. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, do you have any questions for Chris? Councillor Ambrose-Smith.
Thank you, Chris. Indicator 204, gross income, but 6% is the forecast you hope to achieve. You're achieving at the moment 5.79%. Is 6% not rather low for a gross figure, please?
No, that's the benchmark that we're working towards in terms of the 6%, and we're currently just below that as it states. So the yield of that is an acceptable target that we feel.
So where did the 6% come from then, please?
The 6% is a target that we have ourselves.
That's not the answer. Sorry, that's yeah. Where did it come from? Where did you come from? How did you develop that figure?
I will have to refer back on that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Councillor MacDonald.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I noticed that it's proposed that we have a full review on the 16th of January, committee meeting around property. So I've probably got a couple of questions which I'll hold until then, that assumption. On the rural farms, I mean, John will know that, you know, we take an eye on, we take a look regularly at rental incomes, and I don't have an issue with any of those. One thing that does worry me a little bit is that the farming community as a whole is struggling because of the sustainable farm incentive and the ELMS payments that they're receiving, which in many cases are falling way short of what most of the community was expecting. So it's just something I think in the farms group, together with Councillor Dupre, we should keep an eye on. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Ninger.
Thank you. It's following on from Councillor Ambrose-Smith's question about the 6%, actually, and it might well be a question for Michael rather than for Chris. And it's around the commercial portfolio and that 6%, which from my recollection is probably from when that portfolio was set up. The situation that we're in now, I mean, I think what the council did at that time was borrow money to invest and then take the investment income. And the rates at which we borrowed at and the rates at which that income was set were presumably both organised pre-pandemic, and therefore the financial world that we are in is very different from the one that we were in then. But I imagine that both the rate at which we borrowed to cover that investment and many of the returns from it are from some years ago. Could you just confirm whether I'm right about that?
So I think the answer is yes. This comes from many years ago. It certainly predates Chris and my time, and I think a written answer is best. 6% is a good yield, recognising that we're not only in this for commercial position, we also have the position of social value, and just picking up the points earlier on in terms of the continuing of the rural estate and the sustainability of that. Councillor Ninger is completely correct in terms of some of the commercial ventures that John was alluding to in the training, such as our Tesco's estates. We did borrow at relatively cheaper rates. This is the commercial estate overall in terms of its gross returns. So different assets have different rates of return. So this is a overall position, and I think in terms of where the 6% target comes from in terms of gross, we'd need to go back and just go back through the papers to come up with that. But in terms of some of the returns that we're achieving on what we borrowed, they're higher than this position, but that's the estate overall that gives us that position. But we'll come back and provide a written answer on the 6% target.
Councillor Ninger.
If I could just follow up, thank you. That's really helpful, and I think it's really important for there to be that broader context. I think that given the very significant changes that there've been in the borrowing and investment environment, and particularly commercial investment and the values of different properties post-pandemic, at some point it will be necessary to review all of that decision making around borrowing for commercial investment and whether it's still the right decision for the council. I know that many councils across the UK are having real difficulties because they were even more ambitious than this one was in terms of borrowing, and I'm rather grateful that the decisions that were made 4 or 5 years ago were not any more extreme than they were, given what has happened in other places. But I think it's important to recognise that probably that situation has changed, but it will need to be a very careful review about what we do with that portfolio, what's the right thing for the council, given changes in borrowing and investment potential. Presumably, so my final question, and there is a question, is that I imagine that the term over which we borrowed that money was quite lengthy, and therefore we're not having to pay at the moment the kinds of rates that other people are having to pay when they remortgage, because we borrowed at long-term rates for that borrowing. Thank you.
In simplistic terms, yes. What has changed since that period is the regulations surrounding Public Work Loans Board, PWLB loans, and what the rates are and what can be borrowed against PWLB, and certainly if we were to borrow today, they'd be significantly higher than what we've got on current long-term borrowing.
Thank you, but I think it's important for the public to be aware that our borrowing is not at the current rates, it's at the rates that there were at that time.
Correct.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Councillor Murphy.
Thank you. Just looking at control of contractors, it's off target and it's a retrospective audit, but first of all, it's actually really important to understand that the documentation was complete if there's any dispute about the work done. So it is important that it's done, but I don't quite understand how the resource issue is going to be addressed, given there's virtually no vacancies or only one. So I'd just be interested to know how that's going to be fixed.
This is an issue in terms of the control of contractors. It's one of Phil Hill's team who goes into the schools and buildings to just check that the contractors have been carrying out in line with the 5 C's, each reported into site, reporting out of site, etc., the communication. We were looking at reprofiling some of Phil's team in terms of prioritising this to hopefully get this one back on track to complete by the year end.
Any further questions? Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one, and flicking through the report and referring, I know we're in a public meeting now, but referring to the pre-meeting discussion, I haven't heard the mention of RAC. Have we had any issues, and do we see any issues?
I believe we brought the RAC report to the previous committee in October. So that was, and the answer is no, we haven't got any RAC.
Any further questions? Would anybody wish to debate this? Anything? In which case, please indicate if there are any objections to this recommendation, which is that, have we gone out of order? To note the contents of the report and highlight any further details to be presented and considered to show the transformation, change, improvements and current position at future meetings of this committee. Are there any objections? In which case I will take this as the recommendation as approved. Is Jeren? Excellent. So we'll return to item number 4. Can I ask Jeren Clulo, Connecting Programme Director, who is joining us remotely, to present this report, which is on page 17 of your agenda pack.
Thank you so much, Chair, and apologies for being a few minutes late to the meeting, and apologies for not being able to be with you at New Shair Hall this morning. We present this report for Light Blue Fibre, which is the joint venture organisation set up between the Council and the University of Cambridgeshire. Light Blue Fibre has been developing and marketing fibre assets of the University and the Council on a commercial basis since 2019. And the aims behind the setting up this joint venture is to further our objectives as the Council to increase fibre footprint across the county, because as a local authority, we are in a unique position to directly influence the connectivity within our region by taking direct action and utilizing our assets to support digital infrastructure. Fibre ducting is one of these assets, and they are used to carry fibre optic cables, which are the basis of the high-speed fibre broadband required for all forms of digital connectivity. Light blue fibre is a key element of this approach because it enables resulting fibre assets to be made available on a commercial basis, which has dual benefit of providing a modest financial return to the council, as well as helping to deliver high-speed digital connectivity to rural areas that will be unlikely to be connected otherwise. The company's governance structure incorporates 3 nominated directors from each organization, with a number of reserved matters which require sign-off from the shareholder representative for each organization. The agreement, the joint venture shareholder agreement between the university and the council, includes matters which cannot be determined by the directors and have to be authorized by the respective shareholder representatives. The full list of those reserved matters are included in the report. We are expecting a decision. There is an upcoming decision. It is very likely that a request to amend the license term by the end of 2023, which requires authorization from the respective shareholder representative from both university and the council. Due to the recent personnel change in the exec director for place and sustainability role, the delegation is required by this committee. Therefore, we are seeking the appointment of the current exec director for place and sustainability as the council's shareholder representative for Light Blue Fibre joint venture company. I am happy to take any questions from the report. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Jaren? Would anybody like to debate anything? In which case, I assume there are no objections. Please, Councillor Murphy.
I don't have an objection, but I should have mentioned that I do have a contract of employment with the University of Cambridge, so I should declare that. I mean, it's already on the public record, but just to make it clear.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. So this committee is asked to appoint the Executive Director of Place and Sustainability as the Council's shareholder representative for Light Blue Fibre Joint Venture Company. If no one has any concerns with that, I will take that as approved by the committee. Councillor Goldsack.
Just as a point of reference, and I have no problem with what's being proposed, so I'll put that. But just a point of reference, in the third-party shareholder-owned company of this land, isn't the allocated person a member?
Are we on this land?
No, I'm using that as a reference to, no disrespect to the officer concerned. What I'm saying here is that should it be a member that is the person and not an officer, as it is on the other on a similar joint venture vehicle that we've got going elsewhere.
Councillor Murphy.
And also that's the case with Pathfinder. There's a shareholder representative, which actually is myself.
Who would like to? Tom, would you like to reply?
So we will come to this land in a moment, but for this land, the shareholder representative is the Section 151 officer, and then there are also provisions within the council's constitution and the document you'll see in a moment about what decisions they can take outside of committee meetings. So I think it is a parallel with the other companies that there is an officer as the shareholder representative, but then they make decisions in accordance with the council's governance, which refers it back to a shareholder committee, which for Light Blue Fibre and this land is this committee.
through you. Perhaps we'll have that discussion under this land, but my understanding was that it was Councillor Goff was the representative. Right, so we don't have a board member on this one. That's my point. It's not really a question about this land. It's about member involvement and member ownership of what's going on in a joint venture company.
Councillor Bowden, you wish to speak?
I think there is a difference here between shareholder representatives, as we have in Pathfinder, and board members. And I think the problem there is a dissonance here, and the problem isn't what is being proposed in front of us, but what it's being compared with, and that is this land. And I believe the problem lies in this land. It doesn't lie in what is being proposed before us here, but that is a different question.
In which case, I think we shall move on to the this land item, which I've now completely. So can I ask Tom Kelly, confirm the recommendation. Oh, sorry, confirm the recommendation, sorry. Were they confirmed before? So the recommendation was to appoint the Executive Director of Place and Sustainability as the Council's shareholder representative for Light Blue Fibre Joint Venture Company. Does anybody have any objections? In which case we will take that as approved. So the next item is about this land, and can I ask Tom Kelly, Service Director for Finance and Procurement, to present this item? This report starts on page 33 of your pack.
Chair, good morning, everyone. This report fulfills an action agreed at the July Strategy and Resources Committee to publish the shareholder agreement with this land. We do that through the appendix to the report and put that document into the public domain for the first time. We have undertaken a review of the shareholder agreement alongside other governance work in relation to this land, and summarised to committee the relatively minor changes to that shareholder agreement. It's worth just distinguishing up front between the council's dual roles in relation to this land. It's the shareholder in that it owns 100% of the company's equity. It's also the company's major lender. And in this governance document, we're concerned with the role of shareholder, although, of course, those roles are often kind of complementary and overlapping. In terms of the changes that this update brings through, there's a strengthened role for the council's shareholder review group. We've had a deliberate separation in some ways between the shareholder role and the nominated directors. But what this iteration envisages is that there will be formal sharing of this land board papers and a preliminary meeting to this land board meeting, so that there is close liaison between the shareholder representatives, mainly in the Finance and Resources Directorate, and the nominees on the board, who of course have, although nominated by the council, have duties to the company under the Companies Act. The other updates referred to, as I say, the receipt of papers at agreed intervals. We've been bringing forward the timescales bit by bit for this land to submit their annual business plan and into a position in the next calendar year and through this shareholder agreement for that to be received by the end of February, so much more closely in alignment with the council's own business plan. And there are also provisions in the agreement around the supply of personal assurance statements from key role holders at this land and risk register information as well. We've of course been privy to the risk register information from time to time, but this puts it on a formal footing through the shareholders agreement. So those are the updates and bringing this information into the public domain for the first time in relation to our governance of this land. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I begin by just seeking clarity on between the company, the councillors and the council officers and how those relationships work when there is a county council owned business, and if that is the same across all the different commercial businesses.
Yes, so let's try and set that out piece by piece then. So the report outlines the membership of this land's board of company directors. That comprises executive directors, so the chief executive and the chief finance officer of this land itself. I think 4 non-executive independent directors. So they are their appointment has to be confirmed by this committee, but they have no kind of other vested interest in the council. And one of those is the chairman of this land. And then 2 non-executive directors, but they are not deemed to be independent because they are the executive director of place and sustainability and a backbench member. So they, even though they're not deemed to be independent and are clearly cognizant of their council functions and responsibilities and don't have a majority on the This Land board, they will still have, under the Companies Act, responsibilities to the company and its efficient running, and they have to be able to kind of take their one hat off and put the other hat on while they're doing that, and training has been provided to that effect. So that's the company, and then turning to the council as shareholder. So we're a single shareholder. We have 1 vote owning all of the shares. This committee is the shareholder committee. The powers that are shown in the appendix are reserved effectively to this committee. What we do though have in the constitution is the designation of the chief finance officer as the shareholder representative, and they are enabled to take decisions between committees or in consultation with the chair and vice chair where an urgent decision would be needed. But in practice, as this committee and its predecessors has seen, where we've needed a shareholder resolution, it's come through for the committee to decide and vote on.
If I can just therefore add to that, part of the consideration then is the different type of company arrangements that we've got and the type and nature of that company, as well as the scale and good practice guidance that has come from the likes of SIPFA, but also from workings carried out by DLUG at a number of authorities that have gone through recent issues, has identified, what is good practice in terms of the board members bring that expertise around the company and the skills and knowledge of that, and the shareholder is focused on the ongoing returns and direction of that company, through then the board members and their influence and role at the company under company law, and therefore we will have slightly different arrangements given the various size and nature of the company. But it is recommended practice by those bodies that is led by officers, and that has been recognised at a number of different places over recent years as a result of that, and that expertise that is brought through that.
Councillor Murphy.
So through the chair, if I could ask, is the reason why Pathfinder representation, shareholder representation, is different because in Pathfinder we are not the sole shareholder? Is that why we have a member being a shareholder representative and the officer being on the board of directors? Is that essentially what how we can distinguish these?
Yes, I think so. The other thing it's important to say with Pathfinder is it emerged from joint committee arrangement. So it was important to both the partner shareholders that decisions could be taken in one place with the shareholders voting together. So that that's why it's sort of encapsulated in a councillor representative in that sense. The other thing about Pathfinder, of course, is its direct provision of a local authority service, whereas this land and like Blue Fibre are kind of additionality over and above our kind of public authority functions.
Councillor Bowden.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I accept that historically that may well be why we've ended up where we've ended up, it doesn't necessarily address the issue of appropriate governance. And I think that there is a real issue here. It's something which I've been saying for many years, even before the current administration came into play. And I can assure you that within Fenland District Council, which I lead, I make sure that governance issues are very carefully monitored and that we don't cross any potential red lines. And the red lines I'm talking about here are the difference between having our interests as shareholders represented and being a director of a board. And they're two very different things. Now, I fully concur with the appropriateness of the arrangements that we've got within Pathfinder, where a member represents our interest as a shareholder in that company, and that's entirely appropriate, but does not sit on the board, because the board is made up, as is appropriate, of executives and non-executives who bring their professional expertise to the running of the company. And the running of that company should be in the interests of the shareholders, but that's what part of what the shareholder board is there for, to be able to monitor the interests of the shareholders as opposed to the running of the company. And that's a very standard division. And it's also entirely appropriate that our professional officers are representatives, where they are, as is the case in Pathfinder, where they are directors, that our professional officers take those positions of expertise as as directors of the board, because they also are in a position to be able to divide their responsibilities as a director with their responsibilities as an officer of this council. And there is a standard way in which officers manage to, as was said by Tom, take one hat off and put another hat on. However, for members, it's rather a different matter. And if a member is a director of a company, then the fiduciary duty they hold, it's much more difficult to divide that from the duty that they have as a councillor. And in fact, I would say it's not possible in good governance to be able effectively to have that division, as is possible for one of our officers. And that's why this comment that Tom made of taking one hat off and putting another hat on doesn't work so well for councillors. And that's why I was saying before, one of the problems that I've had, and I had it previously with the previous administration, and I expressed this at the time, I don't believe that it is good governance for a director of this land limited also to be a councillor of this council. I think that creates a really irreconcilable difference of allegiance and legal responsibility, which isn't the problem when you've got a shareholder representative. You don't have the same legal responsibility to the company. In fact, you've got your responsibility still very clearly as a shareholder to the council. It is this position that we put a councillor in, of having this legal duty, overriding legal duty to the company itself. Now, with all due respect, we are not appointing individuals or an individual to the council based on their professional expertise. They're not there for reason of their professional expertise. They're there for reason of being a councillor. And that's where this problem of governance occurs. Now, I know that this agenda item isn't about whether we do or do not have a direct member of the board, but I would ask officers carefully to consider the governance issues and the potential conflict of responsibility which exists as a result of having a councillor as a board member of this land limited. I think that the Pathfinder arrangements, Pathfinder limited arrangements, are very good ones in terms of making sure that we continue to express and exercise our influence on the way in which a company is going, in terms of our interest as one of the shareholders, without having that legal liability of being a director, leaving that to the professionals. And I continue to have a concern that in this land limited, we are potentially getting the governance wrong. So my request is that officers give some consideration to that and the administration do so as well. Thank you, Chair.
Is that a question or a request? Can I just?
You can take it either way.
Michael.
I certainly will take the point to discuss with our monitoring officer and chief executive. It isn't impossible. It does add complications. I think when you look at the board arrangements overall and looking at some of the experiences of other local authorities that have had boards made up of entirely councillors, that's highly inappropriate. And not the situation here. There is that need to reflect sometimes issues such as social value and the wealth of experience. Whilst it may not be in this instance, for example, property related, councillors do bring with them a wealth of other experiences that are also vital to the running of companies. But I will take that question back to the monitoring officer and the chief executive in terms of the ongoing direction of this company, which I'm sure we will revisit many times over the next year and years.
Councillor MacDonald. To speak.
Another name. Okay. Thanks, Chair. I don't entirely disagree with what Chris was saying in terms of governance. We should always look at governance. There's nothing to be lost for that. But what's very significant here is looking at this shareholder agreement, especially on section 2 and section 3. Section 2 and section 3. So section 2, any shareholder agreement that covers the warranties is extremely important. And now that is there, clear and central in the shareholder agreement. That's very important, number one. Number two, in my experience, it's unusual in that the business plan specifically lays out, for example, cash flow statements, considering reliability of the funding sources, et cetera, et cetera. So whilst it's fine to look at the governance, the fact that those things are in the shareholder agreement should not be underestimated. That is unusual to find some of those things in a shareholder agreement. And I take great comfort from the fact that that is there. Thank you.
Is it a question? No, I just want to make sure it's questions first, and then debate. Councillor Ambrose-Smith.
Thank you. Tom, thank you very much for this. Just one clarity, please. Schedule 2, page Reserve Matters, page 58. Making or agreeing to make a political donation to a political party. Why should this even be considered in this document by this company?
I think that's a good question, and it's rightly reserved to the shareholder. I think there are no circumstances really in which that would ever be possible or conceivable. So perhaps we need to look to exclude that altogether, unless there's a Companies Act reason I'm not aware of that we have that there.
Are there any other questions? Would anybody like to speak in the debate? Councillor Ninger.
Thank you. I think it's been useful to have a discussion, and I'm actually quite grateful to Councillor Bowden for the points that he's raised, because I do think it's important for us to constantly keep the governance of all of our partner companies, having just set up another one under review, because good governance is absolutely critical to making sure that the council doesn't end up in a difficult situation when it's got companies that we are a shareholder of, and it is a complex and not entirely straightforward relationship. So I think making sure that we are constantly reviewing that governance is really important, and I'm very happy that that review should be done with the things in mind that Councillor Bowden has raised. I don't know what the outcome will be, because I know that it was the case previously that there was a director on the board, and in some ways I've found it very useful that there is one now, but it may well be that that's not the right arrangement. So let's see what the result of that review is. I think it's also very important that we keep a lot of things that are related to this land under review. I mean, I understand entirely why the company was set up in the first place. It has done mostly the things that it was asked to do by the council when it was set up. But as I said under a previous item, actually the economic situation and the economic background and picture that we find ourselves in is very, very different from how it was 5 or 6 years ago. I think that is likely to be challenging for this land. I hope they will manage to deal with those challenges successfully and continue to play the useful role that they do for the council. But it is important to keep all of those things under review at all times and make sure that the council is making the right decisions for the long term for people in Cambridgeshire. So I have no issues with what's being proposed here. I just want to say that it is important that we continue to constantly review whether these companies are being governed in the right way and delivering the things for the council that we want them to. And it shouldn't ever be perceived as necessarily I mean, there might be failures, but constantly reviewing that is not a failure. It's a very important way of making sure that they're continuing to do the things that they were set up to do. So thank you. That's all I want to say.
Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chair. I really welcome the shareholder agreement openness and being able to see this in a public meeting, and I think it's a real step in the right direction. As part of the debate of this section, I would encourage everyone involved with this land to go further and further disclose. There's a lot of disinformation and misinformation in the public domain about the operation of this land, and that affects people's judgment and people's perception of the reality of the situation. I have spoken to the chair of this land direct and asked for better communication out to councils, parish councils, town councils and the like. But I'd see this as very much as a step in the right direction, and I would encourage all those involved, Tom and Michael, etc., to really push for more information out there, factual information that does counter some of the disinformation that circulates out there. Unfortunately, we live in an era, and I've used this phrase many times, but we live in an era of social media, and on social media, noise wins over fact. So we have to make sure that fact stands absolutely true out there. So thank you for bringing this. I look forward to more.
Councillor Bowden.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I welcome the comments made by Councillor MacDonald about the particular versions of the shareholder agreement, which I think are really, really positive. And as far as the agenda item we've got in front of us is concerned, I have no problem at all in agreeing with it. But I'd also like to agree with the comments made by Councillor Ninger more generally. We have a situation, several situations around the country where a number of different local authorities of different political persuasions have managed to get themselves into a massive financial issue, massive financial problem, way beyond just issuing Section 114 notices. And I think invariably, certainly all the ones I've looked at, you can trace the problems back to poor governance. And that's why the emphasis that Councillor Ninger made on appropriate governance is entirely correct. I don't believe we have poor governance here in Cambridgeshire. I believe we have quite good governance in Cambridgeshire. But Councillor Ninger is correct. In order to continue to have good governance, you need continually to re-examine what you're doing and how you're doing it, and to do so in the public eye wherever it's possible to do so. So I very much welcome the comments that are made by Councillor Ninger. I'm not suggesting for one second that we have poor governance here in Cambridgeshire, but I fully agree with Councillor Ninger. We need to continue to review what we do to ensure that we continue to have good governance and we don't end up making bad decisions and falling into the traps that certain other local authorities have around the country. Thank you, Chair.
Would anybody else like to speak? Okay, no, I think this has been a very healthy debate, and I think it's absolutely right that we need to keep on returning to continue to scrutinise and returning to reviewing what is going on, as it may be right at one time and not right then and at another time. So the members, we are invited to note the shareholders agreement for this land limited. Does anybody have any concerns with this? In which case I take the recommendation as approved. Moving on to item number 7, can I ask Claire Ellis, Head of Procurement and Commercial, to present the next report on provider selection regime, which is on page 61.
Thank you. So the purpose of this report is to summarise the requirements of the provider selection regime and give you an overview of the actions that we've planned in order to ensure the Council's compliance. The Act has yet to receive royal assent. Apologies for the error in 1.2, but it is expected to receive royal assent before parliamentary recess on the 19th of December. The two key points are that the provider selection regime is a new set of procurement regulations for healthcare services only, and mixed procurements where health care forms the main part of the procurement. And the second key point, which is a big move away from the current procurement regulations we have, is that there's no minimum threshold for the application of the PSR. So provider selection regime applies whether you're procuring healthcare services worth £20 or £2 million. You'll see at 2.2, there's a summary of the new procurement processes that the PSR brings in. So there are 3 direct award processes, a most suitable provider process and a competitive process. In many cases, we are told that the removal of competition is designed to support integration and to improve and promote patient choice. At 2.3, there is a summary of the 5 criteria that we must use when we're using either the direct award process C, the most suitable provider process, or the competitive process. We have no clear guidance yet on how we are expected to use those criteria, and myself and other key members of the team are attending webinars often to try and work out how we are going to use those criteria. There are specific requirements about applying standstill periods, about record keeping, and about what happens when a supplier does not agree with our PSR decision. Existing healthcare contracts must be managed from the 1st of January in accordance with the PSR as opposed to the current public contract regulations. So we are seeking some legal advice actually this afternoon as to whether we need to make any contract amendments to those current contracts on that basis. We are working with colleagues in the public health team to determine what current contracts we have and what procurements are up and coming in the next 12 months so that we can determine the exact risks that we are facing in terms of implementing the PSR. I think the immediate risks are that it is coming on us quite quickly. We were only told in mid-October that we were getting the PSR this quickly. And so we need to make sure that from the 1st of January, we have the right governance arrangements in place to be able to make the PSR decisions appropriately. 2.9 gives you a summary of the key actions. So those are to update the contract procedurals, to produce a detailed PSR guidance document for our colleagues in public health, to identify the procurements that are up and coming in the next 12 months, and to also identify current contracts and work out what changes need to be made in order that they are managed in accordance with the PSR, not public contract regulations. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Bowden.
Thank you, Chair. May I just ask for clarification? There's a clear distinction here between health and social care. Does public health count as health for the purposes of this of PSR?
Public health services do count as healthcare services. There is a distinction to be made between services and the provision of goods and the provision of adjacent services such as consultancy. But yes, the core public health contracts will fall under the PSR.
It's very helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Murphy.
Yes, please. Two basic questions. What was the legislation intended to do? I mean, what problem was it trying to solve, and what are the benefits of it? Because it's just not obvious to me. And what are the main risks for the council? I mean, you've alluded to looking at risks in future, but I mean, what are the potential main risks, please?
I think in terms of the intention behind the legislation, there has long been a debate about how effectively healthcare services can be procured using the standard public procurement regulations because of the impact of patient choice particularly. And therefore, I think the legislation was implemented to try and identify the difference when procuring healthcare arrangements, and therefore to enable us to make perhaps more patient-led choices when we're procuring healthcare services. I think there's a few key risks. Firstly, that we are not used to making direct award decisions without running a competition. So we will have to get used to, as commissioners and procurers, making those decisions. I think the other risk that we are told about quite often by lawyers particularly is that the challenge process is likely to be one that providers take up because they are used to competing. And if we make a decision to direct award or identify a most suitable provider without competing, we are likely, I think, to get a few initial challenges from other providers in those circumstances.
Councillor Ninger.
I was going to make this comment anyway, and it's tangentially a question. So it's a question you don't actually need to answer, but it's more of it will be about a comment on what Edna has just said. So I really welcome this paper because I do really welcome the intention that I think is behind this change. And I think that's laid out really quite clearly in item 2.7, where it says the emphasis has moved away from competitive procurement in all cases. Commissioners are now able to make decisions based on their knowledge of markets, allowing for other aims of the healthcare system, such as greater integration and collaboration. And I think that ability within the healthcare system to think about a wider set of issues when making procurement decisions is really important. And I think it will almost certainly, I mean, I suspect the intention is very much to allow for greater collaboration between the health and care sectors in their procurement, which I think is something that we should all be welcoming quite thoroughly. And I also think that the requirement to have a lot of competitive procurement in situations where actually it's relatively obvious who the provider ought to be isn't always helpful. And I can think of a number of occasions where it's been deeply unhelpful. One in particular, but it's a long time ago. So I think that's all very helpful. My slightly tangential question is about the recommendation, in fact, which is that we're asked to agree the approach. I don't think we have much option because actually what we have to do is comply with the law, and I think it's quite an interesting example of where, I mean, this one ought to be to note really, because I don't think there's very much that we would want to be doing differently, but it perhaps is an example of why I think we're sometimes nervous about having too many things to note coming forward to the committee. It is important that we have items to note. This is an important one to note because it's an important change in how the council is doing its business. It's a change in response to legislation, and we need to understand that and know it and discuss it. We can even have opinions on whether it's a good change in legislation. I don't think we should be doing anything other than agree. So thank you.
Councillor Dupre.
Thank you. Just a question, if I could. I'm sorry if this was covered and I missed it, but 2.5, existing healthcare contracts will have to be managed in accordance with the requirements of the PSR rather than the PCR requirements they were established under. Sounds a little bit like that parlour game on the radio where you have to sing the words of one song to the tune of another. But I was just wondering what that actually meant in practice, how you manage an existing contract under new contract arrangements while it's still in place or ongoing. And I don't know whether you can give us a general flavour of what that might actually mean without straying into trying to explain how contracts will need to be managed differently, you know, in this room without talking with the contractors. But can you give us some indication of what that would actually feel like and how that would operate?
Yeah, so it is quite unusual. Normally, when we get new procurement legislation, we're expected to continue to manage existing contracts under the existing legislation. In this particular case, there are some fairly minor changes in terms of modifications. So the public contract regulations set out what modifications we can make without having to re-procure, and the PSR's definitions of those modifications are slightly different. So I suspect that's the key way in which we'll just have to make sure that when we're modifying current contracts, we are taking into account the slightly different definitions of what is a substantial modification and what is a minor modification that the PSR brings to us. I'm trying to think if there are any others. I can certainly go and have a look and bring back any other changes that we'd have to take into account.
Be useful to know what that actually meant in practice to be doing that. So thank you. Yes.
Councillor Bowden.
Thank you, Chair. Like Councillor Ninger, I welcome the intent behind this legislation. But let's be quite clear, the intent and the target of this legislation isn't primarily local authorities. It's primarily the NHS and associated bodies. And we are almost caught up in this as a byproduct. And that's a bit uncomfortable because in some respects, and Councillor Dupre has already raised a very valid question, it was the most interesting answer, to some extent, it's not a very comfortable position for us to be in and could create some difficulties for us. But what this does is to reiterate the idea, which is should be central to the NHS, that the patient should be at the centre of all decision making. And that is something which we don't necessarily adopt in the same way, certainly as far as our social care provision is concerned. Now, having said that, of course, social care doesn't come into this, although any mixed procurement does. And I have concerns about any existing or potential future Section 75 arrangements, where clearly, even if we only have a small element of healthcare involved in that will fall within this arrangement. I think we've got a lot to consider here and a lot to learn, and we've got, as is ever the case, an unreasonably short time in which to do it. But it is vitally important that we do comply with the law. Of course, we'll comply with the law, but there are choices here as far as a local authority is concerned. And I would beware of the opportunity which exists or the danger which exists, depending upon your point of view, of taking an easy and lazy approach of the status quo is the only thing which we should really consider. We've got to have a balance when we're considering how these new PSR arrangements are going to work. And that's going to be a learning process for us, and it's not necessarily going to be an easy process for us. Obviously, as Councillor Ninger said, we are going to comply with the law, but the way in which we comply with the law is really important. And that's not so much for this committee to consider as the Adults and Health Committee. And I hope, Chair, that it is the case that there will be a more comprehensive report coming to the next meeting of the Adults and Health Committee about this, because it is in that committee that the nuts and bolts really do need to be worked out, to the extent that they can be yet. I've got a feeling that this legislation, people will still be arguing about its implementation well into 2024, well after it becomes a law. But it really is important that our Adults and Health Committee gets a solid hold on this as early as possible. So I do hope that officers can tell us that the next Adults and Health Committee will have a significant paper on this matter. Thank you, Chair.
So I think there was a question about whether this would be coming to Adults and Health.
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that, but I will check.
May I just ask for assurance from the leader of the council that she will ensure that this comes to Adults and Health as a matter of some urgency, please?
I'm not going to make that promise because it's not my committee, but I'd be astonished if Richard wasn't keen to investigate it, and I will certainly be interested in the answer. And I agree with you that this is largely a piece of legislation which is directed at health, which we have got caught up in. I don't, however, agree with you that our social care services are not patient-centred, and I don't think that was necessarily what you were trying to say.
Councillor Bowden.
Just for clarification, Chair, what I was trying to say that the NHS is set up with the explicit understanding that the patient is the centre of all decision making. Now, whilst that may be what they say, what they do may be a different matter, but they are actually set up with that explicit statement. We are not. We don't start off with that explicit statement, although we always try, of course, within this council to ensure that we do the best we can for the people that we serve. But that's not the same as having in your constitution a specific statement saying the patient is at the heart of all decision making.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Are there any other questions? I have a question. Colleagues have spoken to me about item 2.3. There are 5 key criteria: quality and innovation, value, integration, collaboration, service sustainability, improving access, reducing health inequalities, and facilitating choice, and social value. Social value is where I began my conversation with colleagues about, what does that mean? It's quite possibly everyone in this room would define it in a slightly different way. And it's really important, I think, for us to understand how terms like that, especially with triple bottom line accounting, are being used in procurement decisions, because it's not always clear from the outside. So I think if what social value means and what key criteria like this how they're being used in procurement decisions, if that could come back to committee, I think that would be very valuable. So I guess there's a question there. Do we know any further at the moment?
I think we're expecting that social value will mean we'll have the definition in the Social Value Act, which is basically additionality. So value that is not the core delivery of the contract, but something that the supplier brings in addition. So often examples are given in terms of additional training that the supplier might give, or apprenticeship offers, or additional volunteering hours in local communities, those kinds of things. So we are expecting that is the same kind of additional delivery that we will ask for as part of the criteria. What we're not quite sure of yet is, obviously, when we procure under public contract regulations, we have a specific weighting for social value, and we score the responses accordingly. In 2 of the 3 processes that we're listing those key criteria under, there is no competition. So that's the bit that we're unsure of, that we're seeking further guidance on.
Thank you. Would anybody wish to debate this item any further? I think it is probably right. This should, in theory, be a recommendation to note. However, if members are happy, members happy to report the recommendation as to agree the approach to implementing the provider selection regime as set out in this report. Does anybody have any objections to that? In which case, I will take it as approved. Thank you. So the next item is a progress update on major energy projects. Can I ask Cheryl French, Assistant Director, Climate Change and Energy Services, to present this report?
Okay, so today, Ethna George, Head of Energy Services, who joined us in February this year, and myself are here to share a progress update on the large energy projects as requested by committee. Renewable energy infrastructure and projects are a significant investment by the Council, an area of particular interest for the Council's budget, owing to delays completing construction on 1 or 2 projects, which has impacted the Council's revenue forecasts. In the paper, we have identified reasons for delay, the learning, and some of the legacy contracting issues experienced from COVID. For context, just under 45% of Cambridge's carbon footprint is associated with energy. If we are to deliver the Council's ambitions of net zero by 2030 for the organisation and net zero by 2045 for the area, building up the knowledge, skills and capacity to develop and design clean energy projects is essential and continues to be so, if we want our communities and businesses to benefit from the energy transformation ahead. Paragraph 1.1 highlights how the large energy projects are supporting the energy transformation and realising benefits for our communities. We have established new business models for smart energy grids on park and ride sites, engaging with local energy businesses, local businesses to benefit from clean energy. And we have also worked on decarbonising domestic heating in rural off-gas communities, developing business models where it's very difficult commercially to deliver in off-gas rural areas, and providing evidence from these projects to governments to help bridge a policy gap. There has been much learning as a service, as individuals, myself in particular, and as an organisation on energy decarbonisation. And today is an opportunity to share progress on projects and with this new committee, and an opportunity for you to ask us details. However, it is important to note that the main route for progressing or reporting progress on the energy projects will continue via Environment and Green Investment Committee. Before moving to questions on the paper and the details, I just wanted to highlight 2 things. In table 1, where we've identified carbon savings for our projects, unfortunately, we've made a mistake on the Triangle Solar Farm. Actually, the figures should be for the annual carbon savings, 1,565 tonnes of carbon emissions, and for lifetime, 39,120. As this also affects the totals and a couple of other minor updates, we will submit an updated table to committee, because otherwise we have to just go through lots of figures. The other point is regarding North Angle Solar Farm. This is subject to commercial agreements which are confidential in nature. If there are answers which are confidential, or Ethna and I feel are confidential, we will let you know that the answer is confidential and that we will provide you a written confidential response rather than going into closed session. Is that okay, Chair?
That seems sensible.
Thank you. So that's the end of the introduction.
Thank you. Members, do you have any questions for Cheryl? Councillor Goldsack.
Well, thank you for pointing that out, because the first question I was going to ask you, I thought they were the other way around. I thought that North Angle Solar Farm was considerably larger than Triangle, so I was going to question the figures. Could you just repeat those figures again, please?
Let me get those figures up in front of me again. So you've got the figure 1,565 tonnes of CO2 emissions annually on Triangle, and 39,120 tonnes of CO2 emissions reduced for lifetime. And
right. So my question really still applies, and that is that I'm assuming, as is good and prudent work, these are conservative, and that's not political judgments on this. I seem to recall in the dark recesses of my small mind that we were hoping for a little bit higher than that from North Angle. Is that the case?
In terms of the electricity generated, we've actually outperformed the predictions. So we have been conservative in that sense, in a small c. However, in terms of the carbon emissions, when the project was initially conceived, that was obviously over 8 years ago, carbon emissions on the grid were much higher. And we now work to the government HM Treasury's predictions on how the grid is going to, or likely to, decarbonise over time. So we refresh those carbon emissions when that report is updated sort of annually. So they do come down over time, but it shows the benefit of getting in early and delivering carbon savings sooner. You do get higher than if you deliver a project later.
Thank you for your report. Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor MacDonald.
Thanks. I'll listen to you, Chair, this time. I just wondered, this is not for Cheryl to answer today, on the payback periods, which still overall, I must say, look okay. But do we have any external benchmarks, Cheryl? Because I just don't know what I'm measuring. I mean, I know I'm measuring against the original case, but I've absolutely no idea how that compares externally. Thanks.
We can provide external benchmarks. So when we have our business cases developed under Refit 3 for these the large energy projects, which I think is the specific ones you're interested in, we use local partnerships to benchmark the price per megawatt hour of generation. So we're happy to get some figures for you to look at and compare, and we can share those with committee. Yep.
Councillor Beckett.
Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you for this really interesting report. Just quickly, would you be able to talk us through the tables in 2.3 and the metrics measured there and exactly what they mean? Capital budget is obviously very straightforward, but in terms of the ROI, all of those ones, exactly what that is and how you're measuring it.
Table 2 on swap and prior, is that what you mean?
There's a whole range of tables, table 3, table 4, but they all, table 2 as well. They all have the same metrics, but just can you talk us through exactly what those metrics are and how they're defined?
Yes, so obviously the metric on the left-hand side, your capital budget, so your overall capital approved, your net present, sorry, yes, we didn't write NPV out, sorry. So your net present value. So obviously this accounts for the time value of money. Then your ROI, return on investment, so what you're getting for the capital investment, your total return over asset life. So depending on what your business span, your time on your business cases. So for most of our projects are 25 years, but for swap and prior, it's a much longer timeline. You're looking at a 60-year timeline. So it's the return on investments over your 25 years. So anything after that is additional benefit. And then your payback period is when you're paying back your capital investment. Okay. Now, one of the things that you might find helpful is that, for example, on Triangle Solar Farm, the decision that was made at the council was that we wanted to pay back the initial capital investment over 15 years. And that's tied in with something called the contracts for difference. And that allowed us to have additional net profit from that scheme to invest in services. You could choose to say we're not going to pay back until 25 years and take more profit every year out of that. Or you could choose to pay back more quickly and have no net benefit in services. So we currently base most of our project business cycles on the length of the asset life in particular. And so then it tends to be 25 years.
Thank you. Can I just follow up very quick? I was just slightly confused by the very different ROIs. Things like North Angle Solar Farm only seems to have an 11% return on investment, whereas some of the other ones have, well over 100%.
Okay, so
maybe my small brain is struggling to understand. Sorry.
Okay, so so obviously North Angle will be our biggest return on investment compared to let's say swap and prior, and I can see what you're looking at there right now. So there's a return on investment in the approved October 23 business case, which says 50.86. Compared to what the investment was that you're saying for North Angle.
So yeah, North Angle seems to say its ROI in the original business case is only 5.02%.
Yes, sorry, I think we might have made a mistake on that. I will check that and I'll come back to you.
Councillor Ray.
Can I ask a similar question about the St Ives smart energy grid, which seems to be out of line with the other solar generators? You've got an increase in total return over asset life, but your payback period has gone up, which seems to be out of line. Is there something to do with how much income you're taking from it?
Just to respond on that one, so some of the business cases in general have improved because of changes to the project during its conception from when it was approved at committee. Those changes tend to be external ones that have happened to us, so in terms of clients who wanted to connect to a grid or not. So it also relates to what's happened with electricity prices, so even a short period of increased electricity income for us can make quite a significant difference to the overall business case. In the case of St Ives, originally that was conceived around 2 local businesses connecting, and that was the original business case. But there were certain requirements of one of the businesses, which when we decided it was no longer viable to work with them because of investments they were making on their own site to do with decarbonisation, the removal of them actually did improve the business case. So that is why sometimes things get better rather than necessarily just worse over time.
There's also on St Ives, you've got the increased capital cost as well, which is why you're pushing back your payback period.
Councillor Bywater.
Yeah, thank you very much, Cheryl. As always, you always put 110% into this, so thank you. Return on investment, again, like Councillor Beckett, my brain's probably very small in relation to this this type of work, but I look at return on investments. That was what I drew my attention to straight away. And if you're going to come back with a little bit more clarity, can I see what we're going to get in relation to payback into the council? So if we're taking funding from it, can we see what that is? You know, over a 20-year period or the term of the agreement.
So you want to see the income every year, effectively. Is that what you're looking
basically.
for?
So how that sits alongside the return of investment, really.
So we can, obviously for Triangle, we can show you actuals. For St Ives, hopefully we're connected to UK PAN network now, but that's not generating until early new year. But as soon as those actuals come forward, we can start sharing those with you. So we have forecasts, but we can give you actuals and forecasts over time.
That's perfect. Forecast is very familiar to me, so that'd be perfect. Thank you.
Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you for allowing me a second question, Chair. On the projects, and like Councillor Bywater, I really welcome what you're trying to do here. I wonder if I can be supported. And I know I've approached you and we've got a separate meeting this afternoon to talk about 2 of these or one of these in specific, and that's how I think members should be. But I think for general membership, I think it'd be really useful exercise if we knew from the outset the project planned this, time, cost, quality metrics from the original business case and where we're at today. Because an awful lot of these projects are still to be completed and they're past their completion initial step. So just an overview of that and understanding where we're at, what we're looking at, and then we can start to understand some of the cost implications. I know we've got figures, but the costs aren't always the figures don't always display the full costs because the delay costs are stopping us generating revenue as well. So do you understand what I'm asking? And almost a very, very simple pictorial, it should have been done by this. This change meant it was due by this. This is where we're at now and why.
Yes, we can do that. So it's effectively the change register. Yeah.
Are there any further questions? Would it? Oh, Councillor Ambrose-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry to upset you. Sorry. It's regarding stand ground and keeping it going, minor works to retain the planning permission. At what cost is this minor works, please? And how long do you think do we carry this on for?
The minor works were up to 20k. to retain the planning permission. I was just checking with Ethna whether it was 10K or 20K, but I have a feeling it was 20K.
Will you need any time to increase that cost to do more work?
Do you want me to get this? Okay, so no, so those minor works were to retain the planning permission whilst we wait and see. So there is a little bit more work, which is going to be with gosh, what are the newts? Great crested newts to relocate the great crested newts. And I think that was a cost that we'd included in that 20K. But I don't think there's going to be additional costs.
If I may, but there's no budget built into the capital program for this project. So why should we carry on doing this and moving those poor crested newts?
So we do have a development budget. So we have a development budget which has been taking the project from phase 1 to up to an investment grade proposal. As part of that investment grade proposal, we had a connection which was agreed with UK Power Networks. It was only just recently when we heard that they were upgrading the grid that we've said, right, let's put this on hold to see where things are going to move to. You might have seen in the autumn statements that there was some potential opportunity with grid upgrades to reduce the timelines on those, and with National Grid and with UK Power Networks, they are currently looking at a number of different mechanisms to speed up connections onto that grid. So if that comes forward, we would want to progress quite swiftly into bringing that investment grade proposal forward for a decision on the investment case.
Thank you. Thanks, Cheryl. Thank you very much.
Any further questions? Would anybody wish to speak in the debate? Okay. So members, we are asked to note the current position regarding the delivery of the Council's large energy project and planned actions to enable their successful completion. Are members happy to approve this? In which case I'll take it as approved. Item number 9. Can I ask Claire to present the next report on page 79 of your pack, please?
Thank you. So this paper is a result of the action I took away last time to present some more information on procurement improvement. So the purpose of the paper is to summarise the improvements that have been made since the last external audit opinion was published, and the action that is ongoing to maintain that improvement journey. So section 2 discusses performance management. So section 2.1.1, the 3 KPIs that we report against as a team, and section 2.1.2, the further service plan targets and targets within the sustainable procurement strategy that we monitor and report against. Section 2.2 talks through in detail each of the BDO recommendations that were made as a result of the last external audit opinion and the action that has been taken to address the restrictions and problems that were found by that external audit opinion. In addition, 2.2.2 discusses some additional actions that we've undertaken in indirect consequence of the BDO opinion. So those are around consultancy procurement, procurement governance, the improvement of procurement guidance and templates, and the establishment of the Procurement Governance Board in July 2022. We now have, as a council, a sustainable procurement strategy that was approved in January 2023. And we have started to undertake risk assessments in terms of the highest value contracts, and we are continuing to roll out that approach to lower value and potentially lower risk contracts. We are working hard in terms of, moving on to 2.3, our next steps are in terms of providing training and support to contract managers. And we've also opened up a contract management teams channel for those contract managers to allow them to share problems and best practice, etc. We are continuing to roll out the contract risk assessment approach. We are developing a commissioning and commercial strategy, which looks at the whole life cycle of procurement, not just the actual procurement process. And we are currently and continuing to review the team's capacity to ensure that we can continue to drive the improvements that are still needed. We did talk about waivers last time, and there is a section at 2.4 on waivers. 2.4.1 summarises the guidance that has recently been issued to chief officers in terms of their role in approving or rejecting waivers. And 2.4.2 gives you the further clarity on who approves waivers at what value of waiver. 2.4.3 gives you an example of that in practice. So there was a discussion last time about the Cambridge Medical Campus. Waivers have been granted for this project based on the compatibility reason. Those were all below the relevant threshold and were time limited, so will end on the 31st of March. Following that, we will undertake a compliant procurement process to ensure that the proper contracts are in place from the 1st of April, and that procurement process is currently being planned. 2.5 gives you a summary of the savings and efficiencies through the team. So there has been some significant potential revenue or capital savings or cost reductions, and those are calculated against the first year of the contract term. We've also achieved considerable cost avoidance or non-cashable savings, and the commercial team has delivered considerable service area efficiencies, and those are brought about where, for example, processes have been reviewed. So that's 2.5.1, and then there is a summary of that, 2.5.2. Happy to take any questions. Councillor Bowden.
Thank you, Chair. You'll be pleased when we get to the main debate that I won't be concentrating this time on waivers because I've got other things to concentrate on. But within the waiver section 2.4, there was one thing, I was really puzzled by one thing. I'm pleased about the recognition that waivers continue to be a problem for the council, particularly the late waivers, and I think it's important that we don't ignore that. And I was grateful that in 2.4.1, we were shown the four bullet points what the guidance is when chief officers have to either approve or reject waivers. That was very helpful. But then when we got to the example, I was puzzled because we were told that the waivers to do with the Cambridge Medical Campus project had been granted for the project based on the compatibility reason. Well, I couldn't see anything which could be called the compatibility reason in 2.4.1, nor anywhere else within this paper. So I wonder what is, in terms of providing a waiver, what is the compatibility reason, please? In principle, I'm not really in this particular case. I mean, in general, what is meant by the compatibility reason for granting a waiver?
Apologies for not being clear. The value for money reason, if you read the contract procedurals, it goes on to talk about compatibility in terms of, for example, if you're buying one software and it needs to work with another piece of software, or where you've already employed, particularly in this case, a consultant, and it's value for money in order to continue to employ them, then it's compatibility. So it works under the value for money waiver reason.
I fully understand, Chair, the requirement to have compatibility and why value for money is involved in all of that. I don't fully understand where the waiver comes into this, because surely any compatibility issue would be known about well before any procurement exercise even started, let alone when it's so late in the day that a waiver needs to be given, especially if it's a late waiver.
I think in terms of consultancy particularly, we are starting to issue more guidance around consultancy. We have seen in some cases that phase one of a consultancy project is procured, and there are other phases that come about as a result of that phase one that haven't necessarily been scoped into the original specification, and therefore a waiver is needed in order to continue to use that same service provider and continue to deliver that project. The consultants policy that was reviewed last year provides specific guidance around that. And Emma Duncan, Mairead and I are doing a tour of the MTs to reinforce the need to scope consultancy in the broadest sense and to turn on or off further phases as necessary so that we don't continue to get those waivers.
Councillor Bowden.
Thank you for your indulgence, Chair, but I think we're getting to some very interesting responses here. So my understanding of the example which is given is that the original work which was scoped was inadequate in that it failed to allow for what would happen after the items which had actually specifically been provided for. And therefore, it was necessary to have a waiver because it was found out too late that in order to continue to use the same consultant, we would need to be, well, we'd be in breach of the procurement rules. So we had to have a waiver. Have I understood that correctly?
For clarity, I wasn't referring specifically to the Cambridge Biomedical Campus. I was referring to some examples across the council. I would have to go back and look at the waivers on this particular case and come back to you on that, if I may.
Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report. 2.5.1 on the savings and efficiencies. I have a question over the middle item, really, although I'd like more information on all three, but particularly the middle item. £1 million in non-cashable savings calculated by comparing the winning bidder to the average bid when received. My issue with that is often respondents to bids will put one in at a high inflated cost that says, well, it'd be worthwhile me doing that if I got it at that cost. And therefore, if that's an inflated bid, you've just got an inflated average, and therefore you've got an inflated saving. I'm just wondering what the procedure was for calculating a lovely round sum of £1 million. That was my point.
I'm very happy to provide the further breakdown that you've asked for. We don't often see a very inflated high bid just to submit a bid in a particular case. But I can certainly go back and look at the specific procurements that stemmed from and answer your question.
To be fair, I really don't want to make an officer do more than they're already doing. That's not my point. Maybe just an explanation of how the £1 million figure is calculated, showing us how it could be then calculated in future as well would be easier than going down the actual detail of the pounds, shillings and pence.
Very happy to do that. I'll bring that.
Any further questions? Would anybody wish to speak in the debate? Councillor Bowden.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I was going to ask about paragraph 2.5.1, but I'll rest on the comments and questions raised by Councillor Goldsack, because I also found the numbers in there quite puzzling, and to be quite honest, I found them rather embarrassing in terms of the way in which it was put forward. It seemed highly simplistic, and I wasn't actually convinced that we are showing value for money properly using those metrics in that way. I'll leave that to one side because further information is going to be provided. I was quite astonished in this report by the attitude towards risk in terms of contract management. Now, quite correctly, this report looks at the life cycle of the procurement process rather than regarding procurement as just being what you do from the time you identify something needs to be purchased to the time you make the purchase. It is wider than that, the whole procurement cycle, and it's completely correct that we do now look at this cycle as a whole, because it's almost like a circle. By the time you get round to the end, you start at the beginning again for the next lot. So I think it's entirely appropriate that we do take that approach. And a significant part of that approach, and it's also inherent in what BDO were telling us more than 2 years ago now, of course, what they were telling us, is the risk assessment of contracts and contract management. And I was astonished by 3 paragraphs in this report. And I'll read out parts of those 3 paragraphs, if I may, so that they're put together, because they're not together. The first, in paragraph 1.2, that the council has over 750 contracts on its contract register, over £5,000 each, which is fine. paragraph 2.2.4 says that risk assessments have been undertaken of the 10 or so highest value contracts, meaning that 98% or more of the contracts we've got haven't been subject to a risk assessment. And then in paragraph 2.3.2, we're told that within the next 6 to 12 months, the team will, or hopes to have, a comprehensive list of the council's highest risk contracts. Now, I think it's quite, it absolutely astonished me that we hope within 12 months that we'll have a comprehensive list of our highest risk contracts. It's astonishing that we don't have that now, let alone hoping that we may have such a list in 12 months' time. And if we were central government and had 200,000 contracts, I could well understand why you might have that issue. But we've only got 750 contracts. Many of those are going to be relatively small. And for it only to be hoped that within 12 months we might have a list of our highest risk contracts seems to me to be, being generous, lax. Now, I was so concerned about this, I wrote to the chief executive. The chief executive, as many of us know, has quite a history in procurement in previous employments, and I know he's quite hot on the whole subject of procurement. So I've raised this concern with him because it does seem to me that in this area we are being very, very slow in moving forward with this this part of the necessary part of the life cycle of the procurement process. And I'm so concerned about this that, to be quite honest, unless I have a reasonable explanation from this meeting, I'd want to bring this to the attention of the external auditors, because it just seems wrong to me that we should be so lax in assessing or even compiling a list of our highest risk contracts. Thank you, Chair.
Claire or Michael, would you like to comment?
Sorry, in terms of the highest value, highest risk contracts, they have already been assessed. We're working our way down in terms of value. So I think maybe the point that was made at 2.3.2 doesn't quite cover the work that's already been done in terms of the highest risk and the highest value contracts. And we have already moved on. So those are what we would class as platinum risk contracts. We've already moved on to assess gold risk contracts. And I think the other point to make is that the council's contract managers that work obviously across the whole council will already have a very good understanding of the risk contained within their own contracts, and they're responsible individually for managing those contracts. So the work that will happen in the next 6 to 12 months is compiling that into one list, as opposed to that knowledge being spread across the council. Michael?
Yeah, I think just picking up on what Claire said and go back to the full content of the report, the inherited position was not a good position. There's an awful lot of work that's been done, and the capacity of the team to manage both the improvement, the day-to-day, and then the putting of right is the task here. And that's not excusing anything, because I completely agree with the point in terms of moving forward in a journey of excellence. We have to get this done. So what to reinforce what Claire was saying, the platinum, gold, silver and bronze approach on largely on value is looking at gathering that data. So up to about a month and a half ago, we didn't have all of those contracts above £100,000 in one place, and the owner. So now that we've got that, this is working through in terms of ensuring that we know, we now know things like the end date and the contract owner, the value. We're now mapping that through to the budget, looking at the training. So when it refers to the comprehensive list, this is having that full oversight of everything that's there. But to reiterate Claire's point, the responsibility for the contract rests with the contract manager, and they should be aware of all of these factors. And in some cases, they've got this recorded in different guises and systems and platforms, and what Claire's team have done is pull this together in terms of coordinating, because one of the things Claire's also then looking at is their opportunities across multiple directorates in terms of further savings and pulling together of contracts. So these sorts of added bonuses from having that list will become apparent. So in terms of the risk that's being managed here, that firmly and squarely lies with the contract manager. This is the corporate procurement team putting in that added strength and resilience and guidance around the future procurement, so that we're not in that situation of waivers will always happen, but they shouldn't happen because a manager didn't realise they had to procure. That needs a strong procurement team also on their shoulder going, where are you at with this? So other factors such as the procurement board, which has now been in place for a couple of years, is also adding to the management of this. I actually think we're further ahead than the 12 months. I think there's a lot of work that's already done. I would take the point, and I signed off the report. Hope's probably not the right word. I think there is a plan to deliver this within that time period, and I think it's probably something that in the next report we need to just set out in a bit more detail in terms of, here's where we're at on the platform, this is what the goal is, this is what we're doing in relation to the others, and some of the responsibility doesn't sit with the procurement team, it sits with the contract managers, and making sure, for example, linking in with the training, essential training that is out there for contract managers. Everybody should have done that. And that's one of the things, for example, on the contracts list now, we're able to go through and marry that up against. So it's probably a mixture of hope, probably is the wrong word there. There is a timetable, but also what comprehensive means, and also what the risk and how the risk is actually being managed across the whole organisation. That I think gives me greater confidence that we're moving in the right direction. But I think a further report next time in terms of fleshing this out in a bit more detail will be helpful.
Did you wish to respond? Okay.
Thank you for that, Chair. I fully accept that we're moving forwards. I'm not suggesting anything else. What I'm concerned about is the timescale we're talking about here. I do also accept that risk lies with, the primary control of risk lies with the contract managers, but it's been accepted that as part of the procurement process, it's necessary for that to be incorporated within the procurement team, and presumably the procurement board as well looks at that, and that's entirely appropriate. Now, if it were a case of trying to bring together this comprehensive list of all 750 contracts, I can understand, even if all the data is already there in one place or another, it may take a little bit of time to bring together 750. But that's not what 2.3.2 says, and we'll ignore the word hope. That's an unfortunate word. But 2.3.2 doesn't say that. It says that within the next 6 to 12 months, we hope to have a comprehensive list of the council's highest risk contracts. So it's not all 750 we're talking about here, just the highest risk ones. And that concerns me. That doesn't seem right.
And sorry, just to come back, if I may, through you, Chair, that's what I was referring to in terms of the risk. That's probably the wrong language to use. This will be for all of them, and we're splitting them platinum, gold, silver, bronze, by value. And what this is looking at then the contract managers, their skills, the length to go, the way that the contract is managed. So this is the oversight. So it will be all of, not just the highest risk, it's actually those above 100,000.
I think having a report coming back to the next committee sounds like a very good next step. Councillor MacDonald, did you?
Thanks. Just briefly, Chair. So I think there's nothing wrong at all with Chris raising issue of risk, but I think we all know at the moment the biggest item of risk is around inflation. So most suppliers that we're going to, regardless of any contract, who would previously offer 12, 18, 24 month, 36 month contracts are saying, well, I will only offer short-term contracts. So that is the risk for most organizations right now. Now, I think what Michael has said in terms of working through the contract register. Taking the top group of contracts seems a really sensible approach, and we're still on a journey here. We're on a journey from a place where we had, let's face it, not so good overview of our contracts and potential impact and potential risk, and we're not there yet. I would rather the team takes the time they think they need to take to assess these risks, rather than some quick view and reaching a conclusion in 1 or 2 months. That's just my personal view as a member. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Machini.
I just wanted to say, I think this was very useful, and I'm glad this was brought up. It seems that if we've got risk characteristics going down from, I don't know, platinum, gold, bronze, or you might want to call them like 1, 2, 3, whatever. If the team aren't through with the second category, what they call gold yet, that seems to be the reason why they only said we are not yet in a position where we've got all of them listed that belong to the gold category. I wouldn't worry too much about whether we in our language are a bit less, we don't want to promise too much, just in case, next month this gets slowed down a little bit. But I think it's extremely important to realize, and we're going to come to it, I look at the next item on the agenda, well, next but one, with a bit of apprehension, in a situation where a lot of the stuff that we signed before the summer of 22 is on its head now. And I think starting from scratch was the right thing to do, and I wouldn't necessarily expect this to have been done already, but once you've got that list, everything is going to be a lot easier.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak? In which case, thank you for the report. Yes, I think thoroughness and scrutiny is what this committee is about, and that is the most important thing. The report recommendation is to agree the actions contained within this report. Are members happy with that, or does anybody object? In which case, I will take that recommendation as approved. Thank you. So the next item is the Assets and Procurement Agenda Plan, Training Plan and Appointments to Outside Bodies. Will the Democratic Services Officer update us on any changes to the public report?
Yes, Chair. Just to note, we've got Cambridge Biomedical Campus on the January agenda. It's also going to the March agenda, I believe. We might have another report on procurement performance, picking up on that last item. Also want to flag up a few training items. We've got procurement training tomorrow at 12:30 via Teams. That's open to all members, so it'd be great if committee members could attend and encourage their colleagues to do so. And we'll also have a 9 AM training session before the next committee on the 16th of January.
Councillor Bowden.
Thank you. May I just point out that the procurement training, which it looks very interesting for tomorrow, is being held at a time when 3 of the members of this committee will be in the Combined Authority Board meeting. And may I just ask that care be taken in future when planning training times to ensure that any significant number of members aren't already engaged in other meetings at that particular time. Thank you.
Can I ask if it's going to be recorded?
I was just going to say that it will probably be recorded, and apologies that that wasn't picked up. We do check all the regular council committee dates to ensure there's no clashes, but obviously the CA board one was missed.
So members, we are asked to note the, I'm so sorry. I think I'm just not quite in my eye line. Councillor Ambrose Smith.
There's nothing mentioned about the Mill Road Library. Nothing mentioned there. Should that not be on the agenda, board agenda?
Michael.
Chair, through you, the papers were published ahead of us being informed by the current bidder that they were going to withdraw. So we're presently reviewing that situation with that. There is a potential option that we just want to explore before we finally extinguish that, and then we will bring something back in terms of that. So that will go on to that, but it just didn't tally with the agenda going out.
Would anybody else like to comment?
Yeah, I'm finished. Thank you. Sorry, couldn't get this started. At the bottom of the agenda item, we've got EastNet Procurement 2025. What is that, please?
So again, through you, Chair, that's our local area network Wi-Fi contract connection, including the provision of that for our schools and education. So that's multiple councils across the east of England, and we're the host body for that.
Should I have known that?
I'm not sure why you would, but yeah.
Councillor Bowden.
I was interested, Chair, in that item at the very end of this agenda items paper. What is the relevance of the 2025? Is this something which should come to the committee in 2025? Is that just the name of the project and it's being put in there so that it's remembered to put it into the agenda at some future meeting? What's the relevance of the 2025, please?
Michael?
So that's the year of re-procurement. So so I'm not sure why it was put in other than that reason, but I will dig into that. And if there's anything else, I will write to confirm to members if I've misquoted that.
Chair, I think it's quite interesting and useful to have these notes at the bottom for potential future items which may need to come up, especially if they're procurement items some distance away for reasons which we've talked about more than once in the past. In the light of that, may I suggest another item be put in as a note for a future meeting, maybe a meeting in the summer of 2024, and that is lessons learned on the disposal of Old Shire Hall. I think it's really important that we do recognise that there were some problems in that whole process. We are told in the next paper that this will all be completed by the early summer. So if we could put in for the summer of 2024 for a meeting then, an agenda item, lessons learned, then we can start preparing, officers can start preparing for that so that as soon as the disposal takes place, we'll be able to have a discussion and with luck, learn some lessons.
Michael.
I think, not trying to prejudge the next item, I think there will be further reports that will be brought back on Cambridgeshire Hall, and always keen to look at various lessons to be learnt, whether we merge them in with those papers or wider governance review of assets and procurement. But I take the point because I think there's always lessons to be learned, and that's certainly, you know, I'll just have a think about whether we fit that into a item specific or actually there are a number of deals and these are some of the lessons. I mean, we talked earlier on about the energy projects. It's quite clear there was lessons to be learned. So it's how we capture those and whether it's item specific or thinking about this committee's role in terms of its strategic nature in terms of the lessons learned around assets and procurement.
Councillor Bowden.
There are a few items which are larger, there are some, but not many items which are larger in terms of the effect on this council than the disposal of the Old Shire Hall. So I think it's a particularly important one for us to learn lessons from. Additionally, we'll be, I imagine, more concerned over the next few months about getting the disposal over the line than actually learning lessons at that time. And I'm grateful for the comment from Michael saying that he would take that into consideration for the future. But these notes, which we've now got at the bottom of this agenda item, they are an aid memoir for the future. So may I request that this be put in as part of that aid memoir for the future?
I think through you, Chair, again, it would be helpful to have lessons learned in assets and procurement over the last 12 months. Because whilst Cambridgeshire Hall is a significant project, which we'll discuss in a second, it's quite a unique project in some ways. So it's about picking up all of the lessons and feeding that into the strategy, governance and procedure rules to ensure that that's where the learning is then actioned through the changes in those. And it's just as important to pick up those lessons, whether it is going to be some of the disposal of our office accommodation, such as Cambridge Shire Hall, or whether it is some of our smaller office accommodation. There will always be lessons to be learned in that. So I think I would support in terms of ongoing lessons learned around assets and procurement to move strategy forward. I can't think of the right title, but I think that's where we need to go rather than a specific focus, because the danger is we'll lose the other lessons.
Councillor Bowden.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little bit concerned about the reluctance to consider the lessons learned specifically on this particular project because the numbers involved are so large. But if Michael is suggesting that we have on a, let's say, quarterly basis, a lessons learned paper, which can pick up what there is to learn from the previous quarter and what's happened and what's been resolved. If that's what Michael is suggesting, I would be very pleased indeed for that to be included on our agendas in future.
Yeah, just to clarify, I wasn't suggesting quarterly, because sometimes there will be lots to learn and sometimes there might not. I would certainly suggest at least annually, and what with bringing now, and you've had the two again on this committee, we have now the quarterly updates on procurement and on property, where there are specific issues. If it's right that we bring those early ahead of our new annual report, then that's, I think, what we should do. If there is a specific issue, why would we wait 6, 7, 8 months, whatever? But I would certainly support at least annual, if not twice a year, update in terms of lessons learned through both of those updates. But if there's anything in the meantime, we can put it in those because they're now quarterly reports.
I think that's a very sensible approach. I think that it is up to the committee, the chair, in discussion with Michael, to decide when those will come. And I think definitely an annual report sounds like a very good idea, but there may be issues which emerge which need to come to the next committee. So we will deal with those on a case-by-case basis, but your requests have been noted. Thank you. So members, does anyone else wish to speak? Members, we are asked to note the agenda plan. Is it noted? Thank you. Now, the time is 11:56 according to my computer, and I suggest we break for 10 minutes before the final item on the agenda, which may be part in public and part in confidential session, but will certainly begin in public session. So if we could reconvene at 12:06, that would be great. Thank you. So the time is now 9 minutes past 12. So I would like to re-begin the meeting, which isn't really a word. Members, the next item is item number 12, Shire Hall, Cambridge. Members, this is a key decision item. Please note that all 3 appendices are confidential, but I'm sure we're all keen to have as much as possible of this discussion in public. If you do have questions or comments relating to the detail of the appendices, I would be grateful if you could save them to the end of the item and we will move into private session. Can I ask Michael Hudson to present this report? Yes, there is a. There'll be a public question. The public question will be after Michael has presented the report.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair, for causing confusion there. This report updates members on the position relating to the development of Cambridgeshire Shire Hall. The former Strategy and Resources Committee had received a number of reports relating to this building and development, including a report in June of 2023. That report set out a deadline for progression with this development after a number of shifts in the timetable. That deadline of the 14th of August. Sadly, as is set out in paragraph 1.4, the developer Brookgate contacted the County Council just before the deadline to say that they were unable to proceed. The causes of that largely relate to the changes in the economic position from 2020 following the pandemic, the rise in interest rates, as well as the increase in construction costs that had significantly changed their position on the deal overall. Since that point, officers have been working hard with advisors to look at all options, and that's what this paper largely contains. But just to clarify, at this stage, we're not classing anything as abortive costs because we continue to move forward with this proposal subject to today's discussion and outcome. And we are managing and maintaining the costs of Cambridgeshire Hall, including maintaining and securing that, as is set out in the report, through managing both the equipment and sale of that, the car parking, business rates of that site, as well as the overall savings to the estate by moving out of the not fit for purpose office space and into accommodation such as this has led to an overall savings in the property estate. Turning to the options, the report sets out for consideration and in detail in the confidential appendices how officers have assessed the various options, including sale or long lease. And you'll see some of the comments in paragraphs 2.10 to 2.13 related to those not being favoured. Instead, the report identifies that an income strip deal, as it's described and as was originally proposed, remains a viable option. And whilst there is also confidential procurement advice regarding procuring the developer, that has concluded that the best way to approach this will be to approach the market to offer a land transaction for an income strip early in 2024. With the detailed cost benefit appraisal based on our and our advisors' assumptions set out in the confidential appendices, but in the open part of this, we are quite clear that the income strip, particularly for the hotel and office, still provides a good return over 50 years as well as a capital sum. And we've looked at various other options for potential use at the site as set out at paragraph 2.8. I should note that in relation to the hotel and office, whilst a managed agreement gives the greatest return, it's noted in paragraph 2.8 under one of the bullets that this, though, carries with it a higher degree of risk, isn't Cambridgeshire's core business, and as such, in fact, the lease option is the preferred option to pursue from officers. And then a couple of final things. Paragraph 2.21, we continue to recognise the importance and heritage of this site, and it's paramount in our considerations and plans. So the next steps, as set out at paragraphs 2.25 to 27, is we recommend the instructing advisors to market Cambridgeshire Shire Hall early in 2024 with a hope to attracting and completing with a new developer to move forward with legal completion by summer of 2024, and therefore suggest that this is reported back to the March and June committee, and probably the September committee after that as well, Chair. Happy to take questions, noting we have a public question, but also to note that Tom, Chris and others are here as well to assist me with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Members, we have a public question from Mr. Anthony Carpen, which was circulated to the committee members prior to the meeting. Mr. Carpen is unable to join the meeting, so can I ask Dawn to read out Mr. Carpen's statement?
Regarding my public question under the previous administration on the 17th of October 2017, please could I urge the Council to pause any existing actions until after the next general election, when a new government may wish to take a very different view on the finances of local government across England, and also may wish to take a different view on heritage assets from the current incumbents in Whitehall. As the video shows, this is referring to the 2017 full council meeting, the then Councillor Rains promised that my suggestion regarding the use of part of the site for an expanded Museum of Cambridge would be considered. Yet there is nothing in the meeting papers that demonstrates that such a consideration was made by either the current or the previous administration. Please could I ask that the Council request that officers go back and undertake an assessment of a potential heritage attraction involving a comprehensive consultation with the extensive local history communities, young people and potential corporate and personal philanthropists who may be willing to support such a project as part of the reuse. Furthermore, you should have received notice from the Chief Executive of Cambridge City Council of the motion passed at their full council on Thursday, the 19th of October, 2023. Council reviews its call and asks the leader and Chief Executive to participate in and initiate discussions with other authorities in the region and then central government to identify options for a less fragmented and more cohesive model of government for Cambridge that best serves the needs of its residents. These discussions should involve and engage with the people of the city in a meaningful way, thereby recognising the need for our governance structures to reflect the wishes of the people we serve. Again, I urge the County Council to pause on any further negotiations until there is greater clarity for any moves towards a unitary council set up for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, should a future Cambridgeshire Unitary Council wish to base itself back at the old Shire Hall.
Thank you. Mr. Carpen's statement is also on the County Council website with the agenda and meeting papers. I'd like to thank Mr. Carpen for his statement and advise that we will send a written response to him within 10 working days. And that response may well be informed by today's debate and discussion. Members, do you have any questions for Michael? Please remember that the appendices are confidential and you can discuss them in private session. Officers will alert us if they feel that the discussion is straying in that direction. I suggest we have questions first in public session, followed by debate in public session, and then make a decision as to whether we wish to move into confidential session. So, any questions, please? Councillor Goldsack.
I will try my very, very hardest, and please wave a red flag if we start to veer into it. But I note in the report there are leanings towards examinations for student accommodation. But it's actually stated in the report that we've already got student accommodation. Has any analysis work been done on potentially furthering that look with possible disposals? Now that may lead us into a confidential situation, but if I stay there, I think hopefully you'll understand my question.
So yes, that was one of the alternative options for use that was looked at across a range of different options in terms of both the income strip, full disposal, long leasehold tenure, and as it's in the appendices, that gives a far lower rate of return on the assumptions that we've presently presented. and that's why we've not favoured that option, but all options were looked at.
Councillor Ambrose Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Michael, regarding the town green status, report states that it will take a number of months to complete. Does this not bring uncertainty to any type of arrangement with third parties?
In terms of soft market testing and discussions, that has not been flagged as a risk to them, and therefore, in keeping with both the heritage and the condition and attractiveness of the site, it is not seen as a barrier.
Councillor Ninger.
Thank you. I've got quite a lot of different things to say and then a question. So the first of them is that the sale and move to this building was not something that I originally supported. And when we took over as an administration, I think there were an awful lot of people in Cambridge who had hoped that we would be able to stop that whole move and continue to use Shire Hall. The whole process was at way too late a stage by that point. I mean, I think most of this building had been built. And in many ways, I think while I have significant regrets, given that it wouldn't enable me to continue to cycle to work, which I am now no longer able to do, about the move away from Shire Hall, I think there are other reasons and other ways in which this building has been very successful. I have always had significant concerns about the Brookgate deal and the decision-making process that led to it. I think while there is always a temptation to say I told you so, I'm not going to say that, because I don't think anybody could have predicted the sequence of events starting with a pandemic and ending with Liz Truss that have led us to the place where that whole deal has now not moved forward and not progressed. I think it's frustrating that Brookgate took as long as they did to be clear about the fact that it wasn't going to progress. It's not clear to me how much of that is due to inflation continuing to be higher for longer than many predictions happened, but it certainly, I mean, the fact that it took until August to get them to be clear about that is very frustrating. So having said all of those things, my question really is that during that period of time, I would have expected that Brookgate would have done a significant amount of work on their proposals, and therefore at some place somewhere there ought to be a set of plans, etc., that could be moving forward in a process even while finding an alternative use for the site is happening. So my question to Michael is, and if this needs to go into private session, just tell me and it will, but have we talked to Brookgate about that? I mean, it's also possible that they've done much less of that work than I would have liked to think, but that's the question really.
So I'll try to not go into closed session, but if it needs further explanation, we may need to go into closed session, because I'm referring now to Appendix 3 and the specific advice around procurement, which clearly indicates and gives us case law and procurement law advice in relation to marketing the asset and the ways and means of doing that, to not fall foul of that. And part of that is looking at how we approach the market and what control and what say we have over how that comes forward. And particularly related to that is how we then pick up and deal with what presently we've got in terms of the memory banks, as it were. So we will highlight this as a preferred and potential option for future developers to look at and engage with. And if they choose to pick that up and to look at that, then that will be on their specific inclination, and discussions around intellectual property, etc., will follow accordingly on that. But we can't actually stipulate that in terms of the procurement advice. But it is fair to say that as officers, we have learned a significant amount throughout this process that will benefit us as we move forward to the next agreement with legal terms. I think our advisors have got a considerable bank of understanding in terms of how they assess and move forward the deal quicker. And we wait to see what the market engagement gives us as to what benefit we can have from that wealth of information that does exist, but we'll wait for the market to tell us on that one.
Thank you very much, Michael. I am extremely grateful to you for making the effort to say as much as you have done in public, and I think it will be important for the public that we are trying to be as open about this as possible. So I am very grateful to you for not just saying it all needs to be in private session. That's really helpful, and I think we all understand that treading that line is important. Thank you.
Councillor Murphy.
Thank you. I guess I'm really wanting to challenge the idea that the income strip should score so highly in this list. And I suppose the question is, I'm sort of looking for an explanation. The reason I say that is because the income strip deals that I've seen, there's actually been a great deal of synergy between the income generating activity or business and the party taking on the long-term liability. Specifically, you know, in the university and colleges, many deals have been done via income strip, where the college, the funder is a pension fund with very clear sort of needs and very long-term vision. And the activity is building accommodation, so student accommodation, so that generates the income. And a college will intimately understand the business model, the costs, you know, the risks associated with that student accommodation. And in fact, in 2.17, 2.18, in a way, we're also moving to that concept that we need to have the synergy, because if we do where we take up responsibility for the hotel, for example, that we would need to have that hotel experience ourselves. So there's that synergy between us and the income generating activity. And I don't see that sort of more explicit, and I think that is where a lot of risk will lie. So, you know, that's the difference between it being, you know, a successful venture or something which is just a millstone. And I know what happened in the university world is that no one took into account the pandemic, and that really put a big dent into a lot of schemes. But of course, colleges have, you know, it's very well published. They have a lot of reserves and were able to ride it, and we would find it very difficult. So yeah, so why is the income strip? It looks a bit naive to rate it so highly, is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you. And again, if members want to go into any of the specific detail in terms of the numbers, we would need to go into closed session. So I'll try and keep us out of that by keeping it simplistic. But if that's too simplistic, then let me know. So I suppose, you know, you start from the basic principle of any assets you get to dispose of once, and then that asset has gone at that point in time. So looking at the simple sale and the value of that sale compared to something such as an income strip, where there is an income for a defined period, in this case 50 years, with the potential for a capital receipt. Even then, looking at the net present value, we expect the net present value, albeit over that period, to be double at least the disposal price. So on a pure financial basis. And that holds true as well when we look at things such as a long lease option as well. And again, they're in the latter stages of the appendices in terms of the actual detailed numbers. And I think in that case, it's 3 times more in terms of the financial return. I think the thing that will be interesting to explore over the next few months in taking this to market is the ideas and thoughts of potential developers coming forward in relation to the social value of the site and how that can be played through an income strip deal as opposed to something such as a disposal, whereby we are keen to understand, you know, the employment opportunities, the ability as a significant employer of the city, but also in terms of influencer of the city, and how that shapes both as a hotel and as an office accommodation, which are not part of our core business. But I think that ability to have and engage in those conversations will be interesting when we come back to committee to both report on the numbers, but also what that has done. And again, what I'm trying to do there is not stray into this is not the council influencing and directing, but certainly we would expect that any successful developer we want to work with will look at our values and our ambitions and seek to see what this site can achieve for them as part of those negotiations.
Councillor Bowden.
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions, and I'll try to avoid making any speeches that can wait until later. The first question is a request just to ask that when we get reports back eventually on a new arrangement and we're given net present value figures, that any comparison with the net present value figures that we were previously given on the Brookgate scheme will be adjusted for between the 2 different presents which are involved, the 2 Ps, because we're not talking about the same date. So that the previous NPVs we've been given for Brookgate won't be calculated on the same basis as any future NPV were given for any new arrangement. So I'm asking that an adjustment be made in such a comparison so that we really are comparing like with like.
Yeah, I'll come back straight on that point. I think clearly the assumptions are not going to be the same. So that will be the underlying factor in terms of causes of the difference in any net present value calculation. It's a question of being able to explain that position and why that's come about. I think that is the request.
No, it isn't. My request is that let me just make numbers up for the sake of argument. A net present value of £100 million in summer of 2024 will not have the same value as a net present value of £100 million in the summer of 2022. So if we are using net present values on which we've been given previously for Brookgate and comparing them with the net present value that we're given on any future deal, there needs to be an adjustment to that previous net present value so that we're talking about the same present.
I think it's a bit of a moot point in terms of the net present value at the point in decision making versus a previous net present value, and part of that you would do your audit trail back in terms of calculating your example of 2022 to show what the changes in assumptions are. So I think we're saying the same thing, and it's just identifying that the changes in assumptions or what those changes in assumptions are.
I'm not sure that we are saying the same thing. What I am saying is that a past net present value can't be compared directly with a current net present value, even if all the assumptions are the same. And there needs to be an adjustment based on the different value of money between the 2 dates when the net present value is calculated.
So I think to be helpful, I think we will look at this. I think from an officer's perspective, we will always focus on the current net present value calculations in terms of that's what is of the decision of the day. So
that's oh, sorry.
I would like so I think as chair, I would prefer the officers don't spend a lot. If you're asking for a numerical adjuster, is it a numerical? Is that how you wish the change to be? I mean, there may be a standardized one, or there may not. But I think emphasising that the context was different in the 2 instances gives members sufficient understanding to be able to compare and contrast two different figures at different times.
Thank you, Chair. I've given due notice of my concern. I'll obviously raise it again at a future time if necessary. The second question I've got is more fundamental. I personally am quite concerned about the amount of information which has been given here and the amount of consideration by members as to the correct way of moving forwards now. And as far as I'm concerned, I'll bring this up in my main speech, but as far as I'm concerned, it's not actually sufficient for us. But my concern is the following, my question is the following. Have you, has Michael or have other officers had more detailed conversations with members of the administration about what's happened in the last 3 months and what the proposals are that we've got in front of us, more detailed than we've got in front of us now? It actually will give me some degree of comfort if the administration has had those more detailed conversations, because at least I will have some degree of knowledge that there has been some democratic accountability with a sufficient amount of detail to allow this matter to move forwards today. So have such conversations take place beyond what we see in front of us here?
So clearly we are briefing the joint administration on a whole range of things, and those are confidential briefings, and we are having officer meetings with our advisors which expand and challenge and test some of the working assumptions. The officer's advice, largely based on the confidential appendices, are the data that does sit behind that. Further information from our advisors in terms of how they have calculated that, things like, you know, assumed market rent, assumed levels of occupation in terms of that assessment, that officers have been through and reassured members that they are robust, you know, figures, and advisors are performing their duties. So I think unless either we drop into the confidential session or we can maintain in terms of the specifics without referring to the specifics of what's missing, I'm not able to provide any other response on that unless either anybody else wants to come in.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was a little bit surprised by, but fully agreed with the question which Councillor Murphy raised. And I fully understand where she's coming from and what she's saying and how she said it. It just surprised me that a member of the administration on this committee would have been in a position where it was necessary to ask such a fundamental question at this time if these sorts of discussions hadn't already taken place between officers and the administration. And I fully accept the administration are the ones who are going to push this through and are going to make the decision. You've got the votes. That's what the way democracy works. And I wouldn't necessarily expect that all of the data will be made available even to other members, let alone to the public because of confidentiality. But it does concern me that there has been less scrutiny in the last 3 months about the way we should be moving forwards than perhaps there should have been from the member side. And I'm not saying that particularly from the view of the opposition members here, but from the point of view of the administration. So that was the reason for my question. And it wasn't to get any information about what discussions there have been, just that there have been more detailed discussions about the principles involved, as in line with the question that Councillor Murphy raised, that there have been such discussions with the administration so that the administration has the confidence to be able to put this forward.
Through you, Chair, clearly this is a committee structure, council, and committee takes the decisions. That's why we brought this paper to committee, a responsibility to brief all group leaders and have continued to do that in day-to-day operation of carrying out my role. But it's right and proper that it's this committee that scrutinises these papers, and that officers are likewise holding to account our advisors where we rely on advisors. So again, unless there was a specific that's missing, I'm not quite sure I get further the point.
Councillor Murphy.
Well, since I was mentioned, I should say that really my question gave the officers an opportunity to give an explanation, which I'm really grateful for, because I have experience of income strict deal, but in a very particular context, and this is a different one. So I'm really grateful for the explanation. I think we can all benefit from that explanation.
Councillor Netzinger.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to follow up on what Councillor Bowden just said. I mean, firstly, to make it clear that Councillor Murphy is a substitute at this committee. She came in at short notice, and I'm extremely grateful to her for being here and for asking intelligent questions. If what you're also implying is that there have been separate private discussions about what should be happening with this that have not been shared with the opposition, I don't believe that that's the case.
Councillor Bowden.
Thank you, Chair. I accept the comments which have been made by Councillor Netzinger. I wasn't seeking to exploit that. I was just hoping that that had actually taken place, so that I could have some degree of assurance that there has been sufficient challenge to this proposal before it came here. So I'm disappointed with the comment which has been made by Councillor Netzinger, but I fully accept what the truth of what she said.
Michael.
Just to clarify through you, Chair, one of the parts and processes of preparing papers includes a spokes meeting. And there was a spokes meeting as well with Councillor Ambrose Smith as well, and I'm going to forget if Stephen was there or not. But so I have briefed all parties exactly the same.
And I would just like to comment that there is significant work in the confidential appendices, and I think that it would have been difficult to make any decision without having seen that, and that work does not happen overnight, and we would not have been in a position to know the information within those appendices, which is absolutely critical in order to begin to make a decision. Anyhow, Councillor Machini.
Thank you. Very, very briefly. I mean, I would like to, just for the record, I mean, Lucy said in the first 3 words she said earlier, this is not where we want it to be. This is not where we thought we would be at any point since this administration took over. And if the opposition requires reassurance that we challenged the officers on where we are, and we challenged the officers on where we can go, possibly and legally and financially from the point where we're at, that challenge has absolutely taken place, and it has taken place every day pretty much. The problem we've got is that we're restricted not only by a significantly different environment than we thought we were going to have, not just when the contract was first signed, but in 2021 as well, but also, you know, in a much, much different environment than we were a year ago. Doing what I would personally like to do with the place isn't affordable. And that's one of the problems we have. And it's not that we haven't challenged the place where we are now. It's that the options that you've got when you're actually making the decision are quite limited. So the opposition can be absolutely reassured that we've looked at this in as much detail as is required. And no, we don't make the decisions in private first and then come here and push them through. That usually is an accusation. This time it came disguised as a non-accusation. That's never what we do and never what we've ever done. Thank you.
Councillor Bowden.
Sorry, Chair, make it clear, I wasn't making that accusation at all. What I was asking was to try and get some assurance that there had been more scrutiny of this matter than met the eye. Councillor Netzinger assured me that that wasn't the case, and that this has not been subject to extra meetings. But I found Councillor Machini's comments that this has been challenged on a daily basis more reassuring than the comments which were made, even if they were contradictory, by Councillor Netzinger.
Any further questions? Would anybody like to speak in the debate? Councillor Bywater.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, very good report, Michael. Crikey, lessons learned, eh? This has taken a long, long while to get here, and you know, one thing that we have all learned is how unpredictable the market is. You know, market forces are hugely unpredictable. We've only got to look at selling our own properties to see how difficult that can be sometimes. My only plea to the administration would be that going forward, we really need to drive this. We really need to drive it. I accept that, you know, you've been looking at it up to this point, but I think we really need to drive it because we're also making assumptions on what evaluation bids are going to come in, what their demands and recommendations are going to be of us and the site. I think my only concern about this paper is the timelines you're setting. You know, I think they're hugely optimistic in relation to, you know, the legal deadline of completion is going to be the summer of 2024. Well, you know, my next door neighbour took 6 months to sell her own 3-bed semi-detached property. So we're talking about a hugely complicated site. I accept the leader saying about, you know, maybe we could piggyback onto Brookgate's plans and what they've done so far, but it's a commercial world, and I'd be very surprised if anybody who's got a big commercial background will be quite happy to disclose or give away some of the stuff that they've invested, because we've obviously invested a lot of time and money into this, and I'm sure other people would be reluctant to give that over without charging a fee. So I accept the recommendations A and C, but for my own personal reasons, I cannot support recommendation B, because I just think the timelines that you're setting are hugely optimistic.
Councillor Murphy. Councillor Ambrose Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Just a comment to follow on from Councillor Bywater. I think recommendation B is fine, all barring the defined statement with defined deadlines. I think we should learn a bit from page 75 of this report, of the agenda, that is, in as much as projects take time to deliver, and therefore timeframes for delivery and associated income streams need to be realistic for the future. And that was in the paper, page 75 of today. So I think if we was to remove in the recommendations be with defined deadlines, that term there, remove that, then I think I would be able to support B.
Councillor Beckett.
Thank you very much, Chair. Obviously, I'm sad at the sale of this one. I would still like us to have this as our council office. It's one of those great shames that as a Cambridgeshire County Councillor, I never got to actually sit in Old Shire Hall or be in the chamber there. It's always a great sadness to me. One of the things that I think is really important about that site, though, is retaining some element of public access. We obviously have talked about the mound and the hill and everything else, and it was very good to hear Michael talking about the social value. I do wonder, when we look at the contracts for this, whether we can consider the social value of continued public access of the site, be that in whatever form it is. Obviously, being a hotel, that should retain some public access. Mr. Carpen's question obviously made the point of a museum and public access to a museum, but I do wonder whether this new opportunity of retaking this out to tender allows us to look at other public access that might be able to build into that to allow our residents still to enjoy Old Shire Hall and get some of the benefits of that lovely building.
Councillor Bowden.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. I had never been 100% happy with some of the numbers behind the proposal which was created in the last administration concerning this particular transaction, and I made those points very clear privately, but not publicly. I note where we are now, and I note for basically our plans had failed 3 months ago, and I can't help but fear that the failure to push this forwards at the same pace that was happening previously after the last elections may have contributed to the failure, may have done. We can never tell. We are now where we are, and I think that Councillor Machini is entirely correct to say that none of us would want to be where we currently are. But Councillor Machini was also correct in saying that we're now in a significantly different environment, not merely from when the deal was originally done with Brookgate and the conversations were taking place with them, but as Councillor Machini said, a significantly different environment just from last year, just from 12 months ago. And it's because of that significantly different environment that I'm disappointed that there hasn't been a more challenging process to consider whether the route we're going down continues to be the correct and appropriate one for this council in the interests of the council. And it's not merely a matter of looking at net present value and saying you pick the highest one. It's also a matter of looking at the timescales which are involved, and particularly looking at the risks which are involved in the different options which are mentioned in the report. And I'm disappointed that that conversation hasn't, well, the first chance there's been to have that conversation post Brookgate is today. And we don't really have the opportunity to have that effectively. So I'm disappointed that that broader question hasn't been raised within the council. And I also have concerns that items which have been brought in, such as the town green and what Councillor Beckett was saying, potentially having additional public access to the site, these are all items which potentially impact upon the disposal price and also the terms of any future contract, and ultimately feed back into the NPV. And I'm disappointed on the town green, for example, to see no serious attempt to look at the effect on NPV that the town green may have. And in fact, we'll not really be able to know that until after we see the results of the process that's going to be gone through over the next couple of months. I also think that the legal completion in summer 2024 is an unrealistic target. I think targets should be challenging. It's good to have a challenging target, but to have an unrealistic target, I think, is dangerous. And I'd be pleasantly surprised, and I'll be happy to eat my words, Chair, but I'd be pleasantly surprised if we have legal completion early in the summer 2024. I'll be pleasantly surprised if we have legal completion by this time next year. But it may be that we end up having to go back to what I was saying before and fundamentally reevaluating the correct approach to take on the disposal or otherwise of the old Shire Hall. And I'm disappointed that that fundamental conversation hasn't really been facilitated post the withdrawal of Brookgate. When we look at, just look at what's happened with Hilton Hotels, for example, in Peterborough, and what's happened with, many of you will be aware of the debacle which has taken place there in the construction of the new Hilton Hotel on the riverbank of Peterborough. And it just shows how febrile and uncertain the market is on the hotel side. Now, I don't claim to be an expert in hotel building and hotel management, far from it, but I do know that that market is changing all of the time, changing quite rapidly, in fact. And I'm concerned that the assumptions which might have been made 4 years ago are no longer appropriate assumptions to make now when it comes to hotels. So I'll leave it at that. But I share this concern that as long as we continue to have this suggestion that we will be agreeing to the timescales which are in here, it's just I can't support that, Chair. I just don't believe it's realistic.
I would like to ask Michael for comment, because it is within the confidential papers. I think there was a very clear explanation of different models with the risks, and they were evaluated accordingly. Is there a way in which, because it is very difficult when we're debating an issue as important as this in public session, but the key information is confidential. I believe there was risk. Risk is evaluated in the tables. There is a comparison. I don't know if you want to comment on that at all. Perhaps it isn't something for you to comment on.
Yeah, again, apologies for pausing because I'm choosing words carefully. I do actually agree with what Councillor Bowden just said. I think the proof of the pudding will be in the Easter when something comes back and we can assess that as opposed to ruling it out now. The indicators and the facts, including that risk assessment that's in the detailed appendices, would say that pursuing the income strip is still the right thing to do. If at the end of a marketing exercise we come back to committee and say that isn't the case, then that will be what the market tells us, and we'll have much better information therefore as a result. If, however, the market is confident in Cambridge in particular, then we will clearly look to update the committee. There is then a hard task. I would not disagree, and I look to the people at the top of this room who will be the people sat in the room with our advisors getting this over the line. There is not an easy task to get this over the line for summer 2024, but we want to be clear with developers that Cambridge has waited a long time and wants to move forward with that, and we will continue to press for this deal. And it's good that anybody who wants to work with us knows that now in advance, and if there's party to that that puts people off, then that puts people off, because we need to be able to ensure that this is somebody that wants to see this deal through. So again, we will know more come the March committee, and we will update on both those aspects at that point in time. And I think that's the point where we can move away from conjecture and assumptions to hard returns.
Thank you. Councillor Ninger.
Thank you. I think that's a really helpful clarification, Michael. There were a couple of other points that I wanted to pick up in what Councillor Bowden said. One of them is that I don't think there has been any lack of energy behind trying to get this deal across, whatever the opposition might think, that there is no question that trying to get this deal done has been something that has been a priority. However, as we have all been discussing at some length, the circumstances over the last 2 years have not made that easy. It is quite possible that we should have had a tough deadline earlier than we did. And that brings me on to the need, the desirability of having a challenging deadline this time. So having perhaps not been challenging enough earlier, perhaps, and it's not totally clear to me that that's the case, but it was certainly helpful to have clarity with Brookgate about a deadline in terms of making a decision about whether that was going to progress. I think on this occasion, actually having some deadlines will be helpful in terms of being able to have conversations only with people who are serious about getting on with it, because what we need to know between now and March is whether there are other people out there who would be willing to take this on and take and make a relatively fast decision on this development. Because if that is not the case, then we do need to revisit this analysis in a much deeper way. But the analysis that we have looked at has made it pretty clear that actually, if there are other people out there who would be interested, this would be the best way forward. And that's the step we're taking today. There is nothing to prevent this coming back, or I mean, we're being very clear it will come back to the March committee with different information. And we will then be able to make an assessment at that point about where that information leaves the council. And I'm also clear that between now and March, it's not as if nothing will happen. And the other thing I just wanted to be clear about with Councillor Bowden and with the public is that there have been discussions with the assets spokespeople. If they haven't shared those discussions in as much depth as perhaps they might have done with Councillor Bowden, I'm sure he can ask for more information on that, and I'm sure Michael will be happy to talk to you at any point if you would like to be more challenging or ask any questions you would like. Thank you.
Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you. In the interest of keeping the public informed, I'm going to go back on something that Councillor Beckett brought up. One of the great pleasures was being in the debate chamber at Old Shair Hall. One of the life's regrets is being in the debating chamber at Old Shair Hall, listening to the same debate come up over and over and over again. We want access, we want this, we want that. I'm sure officers will back this up. Access to the mound is done. It's ad infinitum. It's there forever. Access to the alleyway at the back for through access was also done. Right. We have a new question today from Mr. Carpen, which I think we'll consider possibly under private. We've had that one before. Absolutely right. We've had that one before. Right. Let me be very, very blunt. Okay. Most of those actions were brought forward by people that did not want the move at any cost. And in my opinion, they were blockers to stop and procrastinate on the debate and on the project. Right. So we are where we are. And I actually share an awful lot of what's been said in a very good and open debate here today, which is I've got no problem with deadlines being set, but setting them for the sake of knowing they're going to be revised is fine. I think a slight adjustment is them to be, and I haven't heard a single resentment around the room to moving this forward as to what's proposed in the paper. I think it's just B saying absolutely defined deadlines that I've read later on in the confidential report, and I'm like, that's unworkable. You just can't do it. But other than that, I think we're all singing together here and recognizing that 2 years down the line is very different and we can move forward. But please, and I full respect to you, Councillor Beckett, but please let's not have the debates over stuff that is signed off, delivered, and done. And our officers work blooming hard on. And we're talking about public access to places like the Mound and the through access and all the other little bits that came from it. Thank you.
Michael, would you be able to comment on B about the defined deadlines for exchange and completion of contracts, as that seems to be an issue that is coming up?
So I would first comment on that it's the summer of 2024, just having heard the Chancellor's autumn statement in November. I think that realistically we will be looking to bring this to the September committee, as I mentioned before, in terms of the final sign-off. That's the period that I will be looking to. So clearly over the August period, we will be looking to finalise legal terms. That is completely possible under one set of scenarios, but under other sets of scenarios that might not be the case, and that is something that we would inform the committee in March, with a progress update in June. I think is the committee cycle. I might have got that wrong. It might be July, and then September. But that is something that we think under a certain set of scenarios could be feasible. And again, I go back to my earlier response in terms of once we get something back in March, I'll be able to advise this committee in a lot more detail in relation to those factors and the factors why, if it is no longer possible, what exactly the reasons for that are.
Councillor Bowden.
Thank you for allowing me to speak again, Chair. My concern about B is the following. It's not that we are setting ourselves a deadline which is unrealistic. What B appears to say, and please do correct me someone if I'm wrong about this, is that when we, and if we approve the instruction of advisors and commence the marketing of Shair Hall site, we do so with defined deadlines for the exchange and completion of contracts. And if those deadlines are too tight, and certainly if they're in accordance with the words that we have in this report, my concern is that any third party looking at this would consider that they just may not have enough time for due diligence in order to complete an unreasonably tight deadline. And that's why I just feel that purely for commercial reasons, having an unrealistic defined deadline for exchange and completion of contracts in the marketing of Shair Hall could be counterproductive to us.
Would anybody else like to speak in public session? Would anyone like us to move to, obviously it would have to go through the approval of a recommendation process, but would anybody like to speak in confidential session? Okay. In which case, I've been asked to take a vote on this and take on the vote on the three recommendations separately. So, sorry.
Could we have the chance of amending that, removing those three words? Could we have the chance if I've got a seconder? No, you don't need notice. It's at the chairman's discretion.
It would be at the chair's discretion. So just to be clear, which three words? So I think that, so as the chair, my view would be that this will come back to committee and it will come back to another committee. And if there is an amazing, very solid looking commercial opportunity presented towards us with different deadlines, then I'm quite sure that will be brought to the committee. I think it is sensible to move on with deadlines. We've been discussing today how it has been how Brookgate went on for a long time, and there should have been, the deadline ended up being very late, and so it delayed. So if we don't move with deadlines, I think we can end up in a cycle of never really getting anywhere. So I'm happy with that, but I'm also happy it will come back to committee again and again and again, and this committee will be able to make decisions. So I'm not prepared to amend that. Yes, Councillor Bowden.
Thank you, Chair. That was entirely within your right, of course. May I suggest then that we move this in parts, but the part I'm particularly talking about are just the words in B, with defined deadlines for exchange and completion of contracts. So we have a separate vote on those words within B. For the reasons I've said before, I'm not going to repeat myself.
I think we should. I think I'm happy to progress with the recommendations as they are. So we'll vote on the recommendations as they stand without an amendment or without voting in parts.
I'd have thought, Chair, that you would like to have as much unanimity as possible within this room. And by your refusing the procedural motion to take it in parts, you would be obliging some of us at least to vote against B. And I'm sure you would want, Chair, surely, all of us to approve the instruction of advisors and commence the marketing of the Shair Hall site at the earliest opportunity. Is it not in the interest of this council for you to agree the procedural motion to allow us all to agree that?
Councillor MacDonald.
Chair, I've been very patient. I've listened to a lot of discussion from Chris and some of the colleagues. Look, if we didn't have the words in B, recommendation, with defined deadlines, Chris would be arguing, why haven't we got defined deadlines? You know, it's a complete nonsense. If Chris and colleagues want to vote against, let's move to the vote. Thanks.
The joy of numbers.
I agree. So members, we are asked to.
Chair, what's nonsense? I'm going to speak on record. What's nonsense is the chair looking at the leader and getting the thumbs up. That's nonsense. That's utterly nonsense and was witnessed. And I hope our camera saw it as well. And the joy of numbers is you've got the right, you've got the vote. I said earlier, we're largely in agreement here. Let's move forward. Let's get it done. We're supposed to have another meeting at 1:30.
Councillor Ninger.
I actually object to that. I did give her a thumbs up, but I gave her a thumbs up on the basis that it is her decision because she is the chair. And whether that would have been the decision that I made or not, it might not have been. The members opposite, had they wished to put in an amendment, had plenty of opportunity to do so. These papers have been published for many days. We have a procedure about amendments. If there'd been an amendment, we could have had a debate on an amendment. The chair has absolute discretion whether or not to take amendments on the day. I fully support her in her decision. It is her decision. It is her committee. And I would suggest that she gets on with chairing it as she is doing so splendidly. Thank you, Ros.
On that basis, I suggest we move to the vote. So the report I will vote on the recommendations individually. Recommendation A is A, note the commercial update and withdrawal of Brook rate prior to the deadline approved by the July Strategy and Resources Committee. Can I see all those in favour? That's unanimous. Recommendation B, approve the instruction of advisors and commence the marketing of the Shair Hall site at the earliest opportunity with defined deadlines for exchange and completion of contracts. Can I see all those in favour? Can I see all those against? And can I see any abstentions? Thank you. Report recommendation C, bring an update report to the March Assets and Procurement Committee on market engagement and preferred bidder for approval or next steps to move to that stage of appointment at the following committee. Can I see all those in favour? Again, that was unanimous. Thank you. Members, that was the final item on today's agenda. Our next meeting is on 16th January at 10 a.m. Thank you to all the officers who have contributed to this meeting and thank you to the members. Good afternoon.